Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Israel's Prime Minister sends Hamas an ultimatum: return all remaining hostages by Saturday or the ceasefire is over. Elon Musk defends his hostile cost-cutting measures as he slashes the spending of the US federal government. And US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tells NATO it is a critical year for the Ukraine war as the third anniversary of the conflict approaches. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered military to gather forces inside and around the Gaza Strip. He's also warning intense fighting will resume and the ceasefire will end if Hamas doesn't release the remaining hostages. His comments came after a 4-hour meeting with the Security Cabinet, which also supports President Trump's demand for all hostages to be returned by noon on Saturday. Here's just what he had to say.
In light of Hamas's announcement of its decision to violate the agreement and not release our hostages, last night I ordered the military to gather forces inside and around the Gaza Strip. This operation is being carried out at this time. It will be completed in the very near future. If Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday noon, the ceasefire will end, and the military will return to intense fighting until Hamas is finally defeated.
Can you tell? Following his comments, Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister Sharon Haskell spoke to Al Arabiya News. In an exclusive interview, she told us there's no reason for Hamas to continue to hold hostages and shared her thoughts on the future of the two-state solution. Take a listen.
Obviously, we are backing Trump's declaration asking to return all of the hostages. There's no reason for Hamas to hold our hostages and to prolong the situation. When we signed with Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, a ceasefire agreement, we knew we were signing a deal with a terrorist organization, and we knew they cannot be trusted. They violated the agreement from the start. For example, not giving us the list of the names of the people that are going to be released, or not until today, not giving the status of which hostage, in what condition they are. The fact that they didn't release Arabiya English, which she was meant to be released among the first one, was another violation, a brutal violation of the agreement as well. And now Hamas is coming and complaining about what we did because they didn't release Arabiya English, to wait with the returning of the Gazan citizen to the north until they release her, like they actually committed to. Well, it's absolutely unacceptable. I think that we cannot talk about it right now because we will not reward again the worst crime that was committed against the Jews since the Holocaust, the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, with a state. This would be actually like rewarding the worst terror act against our country. You know what we need to talk about? We need to talk about the Palestinian leadership. And we need a brave Palestinian to rise up and to actually say, I want to create a better future for my people. I accept the state of Israel will not go anywhere. And I want to find a solution when we can live side by side. When there's going to be a Palestinian leader that can say that in Arabic, not in English, but in Arabic to its own people, that will be the first step about reconciliation, about building a bridge between the two people. But until now, there isn't a single Palestinian leader that can actually say.
We can now speak to our correspondent Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv. Giles, good evening to you and thank you for joining us. First of all, the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister says it's backing Trump's declaration asking Hamas to return all the hostages. Can we expect the IDF to resume fighting if Hamas just doesn't obey these demands?
Well, I think the Deputy Foreign Minister's comments there really reflect the lack of clarity over exactly what the Israeli government's demands are to Hamas, because we've had some reports that the cabinet that met on Tuesday, the meeting taking 4 hours, voted unanimously to back the suggestion from the US President Donald Trump that Hamas should release all of the hostages on Saturday, not just 3 or 4 or 5. But if you look closely at Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister's statement that he gave almost exactly 24 hours ago, he says that if Hamas does not return our hostages, the ceasefire will end. The really important word in that sentence is are. That could reflect, yes, support of President Trump's idea that all of the hostages should be released. It could perhaps mean that just a handful of hostages are released, some sort of compromise reached between Hamas and the Israeli government. At this stage, it's just not clear.
So, Giles, is the Gaza ceasefire deal now at real risk of collapsing?
Well, it certainly is, and I think that's why we're seeing the diplomatic efforts behind the scenes, but also out in public, to try to keep this ceasefire deal alive before that ultimatum, which has been given by the Israeli Prime Minister, expires at noon local time on Saturday. You have a leader from Hamas, a senior official in Cairo in Egypt, taking part in talks there. We've also been hearing that the Qataris have been working very hard behind the scenes to try to bring the two sides closer together. And you also have at the same time this pressure campaign from the Trump administration in Washington. Steve Witkoff, the US Special Envoy for the Middle East, echoing some of his boss, the president's comments in relation to Hamas, saying that Donald Trump, the US president, expects something different to happen, and if not, there's going to be a big problem.
Yes, indeed, Giles. But the images of 3 emaciated hostages that were released last Saturday, they really shocked Israel and the world. Some are blaming Netanyahu for not agreeing to a ceasefire deal sooner. I know there have been protests outside the PM's house in Jerusalem today, but is there a feeling of growing discontent in Israel with the leadership and how the ceasefire is actually going?
Well, yeah, in addition to those protests outside the Prime Minister's house, we've also had some protests here in Tel Aviv with demonstrators blocking one of the major highways into the city. You also have the Hostages Families Forum, which represents families of hostages who were or still are held by Hamas in Gaza, really pleading with the government not to put the ceasefire deal in any danger, talking about exactly what you mentioned, the condition of the last round of hostages who were released, those images that went around the world of them looking emaciated or gaunt in very sort of tough conditions. And we also, at the same time, have voices coming out of Gaza, Gazans saying that there is fear, there's tension in the air as this clock ticks down towards that deadline, and they face the prospect of facing another Israeli offensive.
Yes, indeed, Giles. Giles, just shifting gears slightly, Egypt's President al-Sisi has actually issued an ultimatum to Trump. What does he have to say?
Well, that's not actually been publicly confirmed, but we've had these reports that President Sisi of Egypt has said to the Trump administration that he will not come to the White House if Trump's plan in terms of the US taking over Gaza is going to be on the agenda of that meeting. No comment yet about these reports from either the Egyptian presidency or indeed the Egyptian foreign ministry, but certainly officials in the presidency, in the foreign ministry, will have been watching as Jordan's King Abdullah took part in a meeting with President Trump at the White House on Tuesday, and he was put in this very difficult spot, really pushed into a corner, sitting next to President Trump in the Oval Office, asked repeatedly over about 20 minutes or so by reporters whether he supports Trump's vision for the future of Gaza, and he had to repeatedly dodge that question, evade that question, repeatedly saying that he is waiting for Egypt to set out what it says is going to be a comprehensive vision for the future of Gaza.
Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Now, Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has made a surprise first appearance at the White House alongside President Donald Trump. The tycoon, tasked by Trump to lead federal cost-cutting efforts through his Department of Government Efficiency, spoke to reporters in the Oval Office. He denied leading a hostile takeover of the government and defended his plans, warning that America would go bankrupt without them. Here's a reminder of what he had to say.
Your detractors, Mr. Musk.
What?
Including a lot of Democrats.
I have detractors?
You do, sir.
I don't believe it.
Say that you're orchestrating a hostile takeover of government and doing it in a non-transparent way. What's your response to that criticism?
Well, first of all, people voted for major government reform, and that's what people are going to get. They're going to get what they voted for. We spend a lot of money on defense. But if that just keeps going, we're essentially going to bankrupt the country. So what I really want to say is, like, it's not optional for us to reduce the federal expenses. It's essential.
Let's get some reaction from Washington with our correspondent, Sarah Firth. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. Elon Musk was unsurprisingly given quite a grilling by reporters in his debut appearance, and he admitted he would make mistakes, like all of us, basically.
Yes, I mean, it was pretty remarkable scenes at the White House with billionaire Elon Musk joining President Trump in the Oval Office and facing for the first time those questions by reporters, and some pretty tough questioning too. Now, Elon Musk was saying to the reporters that, look, he is intending to carry out President Trump's plans for aggressively cutting back on federal government spending. He was questioned by the reporters, though, over some of the claims he made. They were saying, look, you've made these claims with regards to US aid and some of where the money's going. Those proved to be inaccurate when fact-checked. What do you have to say about that? And Elon Musk coming out and saying, well, look, some of the time, yes, I will be incorrect. It's right, you fact-checked. He wanted to really hammer home that this was about transparency, that it would all be going up online, going up on X. There are issues here, though, and one of the big issues is the fact that you have got Elon Musk, an unelected official himself, and you've heard those criticisms that Musk is carrying out some kind of hostile takeover. He's refuted that, but the fact of the matter is he is unelected and he is being given a huge amount of power by President Trump. And in those questioning, you know, he's holding his hands up saying mistakes will get made, but a critical point is the fact that he is unelected, and President Trump has been acting on those claims that Elon Musk makes. I mean, you saw them there shoulder to shoulder in the Oval Office. So it raises very big questions about the fact that President Trump is acting on these claims that Elon Musk himself is conceding won't always necessarily be accurate.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely right. There seems to be a real bromance budding between both of them. But President Donald Trump also signed an executive order enforcing federal agencies to work with the US DOGE service to cut their existing workforce and limit future hiring. It's arguably the most explicit statement yet by the president that he supports these large-scale cuts to the federal workforce. What more do we know?
You're right, a bromance backed by an executive order, because that executive order, very serious. They're going to be seeking to slash, as we said, federal government spending, but that is going to be looking to radically reduce the workforce across federal government. And you also had in some of the detail of that executive order information like the fact that any new hirings in some of these departments, they will have to go through a Department of Government Efficiency representative that essentially hands this huge amount of authority to Elon Musk himself and to his Department of Government Efficiency. And that is where you're getting these criticisms of a hostile takeover, is once again, you know, Elon Musk is unelected. And so you've got a lot of noise being made in Washington right now about the level of power and the level of responsibility that President Trump is handing over to Elon Musk. So there are really big questions around this, but as you said, you know, that they're shoulder to shoulder. It's very clear that President Trump has put his trust in Elon Musk. Elon Musk there with his 4-year-old son. There were some light-hearted moments, but on a very serious topic. There are federal workers across the country right now very, very concerned for their futures, what this will mean for their jobs. There are huge changes underway. There are going to be legal challenges. There are already legal challenges to some of these executive orders that President Trump is signing. But it really was quite a big moment there, having Elon Musk stood in the Oval Office with his young son, and President Trump putting so much power once again in his hands.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of uncertainty over the workforce in the US, as you said. But I just want to go back on and touch actually on Elon Musk's son. He was there. He kind of stole the show with his antics. He was picking his nose at one stage. What more do we know about his son and what he was up to in the Oval Office?
Well, President Trump describing Elon Musk's 4-year-old son, known as Little X. That's what Elon Musk has nicknamed him and how he's known to many across America. President Trump had called him a person of high IQ, so quite like his father, it's thought. But yes, there were some moments where even President Trump looked a little bit unsure about sharing the limelight with that young man. But it was a moment of brevity in what was a very serious topic, because, of course, you did have those reporters pushing very hard on the questioning. You have got these talks of the hostile takeover. Elon Musk, for his part, has said, look, there's nothing radical here. We're going to be transparent. He's there with his son. He's relaxed. At one point, he had little X on his shoulders. They were enjoying that moment, and it was quite a moment with Elon Musk's son, you know, touching the Resolute desk. There's some incredible imagery that came out of that. And I think once again, it just really underscores, doesn't it, that level of trust, that level of relationship that Elon Musk and President Trump have reached. And it also speaks, I think, to, again, the questions over the authority and the power that billionaire Elon Musk, who is the head, the CEO of many companies, the level of authority he now holds, and where the checks and balances on that authority comes from, given that he is unelected. So it's ruffled a lot of feathers, that appearance in the Oval Office yesterday. And President Trump, for once, sharing the limelight, it seemed willingly, at least for most part.
Yes, indeed. I just want to shift gear quickly. And Trump has been hosting world leaders at the White House. We've seen pomp and ceremony going on. We know India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is arriving today, and reports suggest their friendly rapport could actually be tested. What more?
It's going to be very interesting. So you've got Narendra Modi on this 2-day visit to Washington. It's expected he'll be meeting with President Trump in the White House on Thursday. Look, we saw in Trump's first term, they had a close relationship. They were friendly. They were warm. They were on the same page in many areas. There's a huge amount of business and trade that goes on between the two countries. You've got India as the highest spender in the U.S. Defense equipment. So there is a very close relationship here. There is a business relationship here. You've heard both sides seeming to signal that they'll want to continue that. But there are two big sticking points here. One is going to be trade. We know that President Trump is not happy about the American trade deficit with India. We know that he's not happy when it comes to the high import duty on goods that make it difficult to enter the Indian market. We've also got the issue of immigration. Now, Modi, for his part, has signaled that he's fully on board when it comes to President Trump's aggressive stance on illegal immigration, and that there will be full cooperation from India. Those are the kinds of comments that you can see clearly. He's trying to sweeten President Trump up a little bit, perhaps ahead of that official meeting between the two. They have had, up until this point, a friendly relationship. But what we're seeing from President Trump, his second term in the White House, is a more aggressive, more confident president. He is willing to play hardball, and he is putting his money where his mouth is this time, frankly, and making these executive orders, and not afraid when he's meeting these world leaders to be leading the charge. So it's going to be very interesting to see the details of what come out of that meeting between the two that have been on friendly terms until now. Can that continue with this more aggressive stance from Trump?
Time will tell, Sarah Firth. Time will tell. Our correspondent in Washington, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A Russian attack on Kyiv has left one person dead and injured 3 others, including a 9-year-old child. The early morning missile also sparked several fires in the city, according to Ukrainian officials. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said on Telegram that emergency services were called at least 4 districts of the Ukrainian capital. Canada has appointed a former deputy commissioner of the RCMP as the country's first fentanyl czar. Kevin Borosu also previously worked as Justin Trudeau's deputy national security and intelligence advisor. President Trump has threatened to impose tariffs from all Canadian imports until their government cracks down on the flow of fentanyl across the border. Now, the White House banned an Associated Press reporter from entering the Oval Office last night over the news agency's decision to keep using the name of Gulf of Mexico. It comes as President Trump renamed the coastline the Gulf of America. 2 unidentified journalists were turned away from the press evening, with a second AP staff member later blocked from the White House diplomatic room. AP's senior vice president and executive editor has called the move unacceptable and accused the Trump administration of violating the First Amendment. And a giant schnauzer has beaten over 2,500 other canines to be crowned best in the show at the 2025 Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show in New York. 5-year-old Monty is the first of his breed to win the prize since 2004. Bourbon, the Whippet, who came out of retirement for the event, was awarded the runner-up prize of Reserve Best in Show. To Brussels now, and US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has visited NATO today, becoming the first member of the Trump administration to do so. His appearance comes ahead of the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine later this month, with Western allies keen to know where the US stands when it comes to the outcome of the war. President Trump has previously promised to end the conflict and has encouraged both sides to make a deal. Let's cross live to Brussels to speak to our EU correspondent, Jack Parrock. Jack, good evening to you. Actually, in the last few moments, we're hearing Trump and Putin have had a phone call for 1.5 hours and agreed to a time which has come together. What more can you tell us about this phone call and the latest developments?
Yeah, that's about all the information that we have at the moment, that this phone call has taken place. But it is very significant. Trump has said that he wants a quick peace deal, and direct talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin are the most likely way to get that. The question is, what will that mean? Who will be involved in any future peace talks? What will that mean for the Ukrainians? They will be looking very closely into this. There's been a lot of action and discussions about what can happen in this area, and specifically here at NATO. As you say, Pete Hegseth, the new US Defense Secretary, he came to Brussels today to meet with his NATO counterparts, and he left no stone unturned. His tone was very clear about what the United States wants. Firstly, very clearly, that US opposition to Ukraine joining the NATO military alliance was clear under the Trump administration. That was something, talks for Ukraine to be a NATO member, they've been dangled as a suggestion that Ukraine could eventually become a NATO member, which is something that is absolutely out of the question for Russia, as it would bring the NATO border all the way up to the Russian border, which is something that the Russians feel that they were promised by NATO wouldn't happen. He also said that peace negotiations would have to take place, but the idea of returning to pre-2014 borders, for instance, when Crimea was part of Ukraine, that was, and he quoted, an unrealistic objective. So we've had this outline from Pete Hegseth here, and we've had this call between the Russian president and the US president, and there is going to be a lot of action, a lot of pressure here to see exactly what comes out of this. There's a lot of movement as well, a lot of meetings coming in the coming few days and weeks.
Yes, indeed. But this will be a major blow for Zelensky, won't it? What we're hearing here, especially about what Hegseth said about NATO. Have we had any reaction at all from the Ukraine side?
So the Ukrainians are trying to keep a relatively low profile. There was a press conference today, but the Ukrainian defense minister, alongside the British defense minister, who's sort of in charge of chairing the meetings, and their tone is relatively muted. So they want to keep a sort of a calm around this. They know what the Trump administration wants. They want this peace deal, and they want, as I said, no Ukrainian entry into the NATO military alliance. They don't want to change the borders, and they're saying basically that that the Ukrainians. But the big question really is what will happen with Zelensky, right? That's the question now, because what he has is the Russian president, who is obviously against him, and now he has Donald Trump in the White House, who is also kind of against him and has spoken out against him. So the question is, will Zelensky now potentially start to be sidelined out of these discussions? And what will the NATO allies do in that case?
So, Jack, we're just hearing, actually, while we're on air and I'm chatting to you, reports are saying that Donald Trump is going to call Zelensky any moment now to tell him what he's discussed with Vladimir Putin. So, as you say, a lot of action and a lot of pressure. But Trump says the war is costing the American taxpayer just far too much money. But could brokering a really hasty deal, like you say, pressure, have significant long-term risks for Ukraine and its people?
It could. I mean, this is to do with the borders. Firstly, what does it mean? How far would the borders be changed? What is the Trump plan for that? As soon as I come off air from you, a lot of people like me will be immediately poring over the details of that potential call and whether there was a peace, there's any structure to this peace outline. This is what everyone wants to know. In the last few days, we saw the Trump administration appoint General Keith Kellogg to be his envoy for Ukraine and Russia. This man cannot breathe without the world's attention being focused on exactly what he says, because everybody wants to know what the US thinking behind that is. He is going to be at the Munich Security Conference. We know that. Zelensky's also going to be at the Munich Security Conference coming in the next few days. He's expected to meet J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, who has been frankly pretty, condemning of Ukraine. He's said in the past that he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. So we'll have to see what those meetings sort of amount to. There's a big triangulation now around that security conference and what could potentially come out of it. But the big thing has been, what will Trump do? Well, all of those meetings have been scheduled, and this call with Vladimir Putin, this is the thing that's going to shed light on it.
Jack, I think we've all been wondering what Donald Trump's going to do, but we'll definitely find out. Jack Parrock, EU correspondent in Brussels, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. An American school teacher who was detained for more than 3 years in Russia has been welcomed back to the US by President Donald Trump. Mark Fogel was sentenced to 14 years in prison after he was arrested for traveling with medically prescribed cannabis. Trump said his release could be a big, important part of ending the war with Ukraine, but refused to say what the US had given in exchange. Just hours later, the Kremlin said that a Russian citizen was freed from a US prison. Now, one person has died and 25 others are injured after a high-speed train collided with a truck outside Hamburg. 6 people were said to be in a serious condition after the level crossing crash. A 55-year-old passenger died at the scene. The FBI has uncovered 2,400 lost files connected to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. President Trump had previously ordered all files relating to the 1963 shooting to be declassified. The head of the new task force on declassification of federal secrets believes 2 shooters were involved in JFK's assassination, contradicting official account that gunman Lee Harvey Oswald was solely responsible. And Pope Francis continues to suffer with a bout of bronchitis. During his weekly general audience at the Vatican earlier today, he asked an aide to read his remarks for the second time in 2 weeks. The 88-year-old has battled influenza and other health issues after taking over as pontiff in 2013. Tens of millions of pilgrims are flocking to the Kumbh Mela in India as the enormous religion event inches towards its ending. Wednesday is one of the most crucial days in the 6-week-long Hindu festival. Security has been beefed up after a crowd rush killed at least 30 people 2 weeks ago, as Ishnan Garg tells us from New Delhi.
Millions of people took a dip at the confluence of the 3 of the holiest rivers for Hindus on Wednesday as the Kumbh Mela festival continues. Officials are now tightening security at the Hindu festival amid allegations of mismanaging what's being called the biggest religious gathering anywhere in the world. Dozens of security checkpoints were set up, and additional police as well as paramilitary forces and helicopters were deployed to deal with the huge number of pilgrims that are now pouring in. Authorities are also now urging people to not flock to the main confluence point and instead use other stretches of the riverbank to take a customary dip that the devotees believe will absolve them of their sins. Now, this increased preparations and scrutiny comes as pressure has been building on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP party over a stampede that killed at least 30 people 3 weeks ago. Bharatiya Janata Party, or the BJP officials, are now facing criticism for not planning entry and exit routes well as well. Some family members of those who had died in that stampede say they have yet to receive the compensation. At that point, the government says it is making all necessary efforts to address these concerns. Now, state officials had announced about $29,000 for the kin of the deceased, and some people are also complaining about being burdened with bureaucracy to receive this amount of money, including facing very long delays in getting death certificates from local officials. Now, religious scholars say this year's event is special because they say stars have aligned in a particular pattern after 144 years to make this Kumbh Mela more auspicious. That's because some 460 million people are already estimated to have attended the religious event, and that number could rise further as millions continue pouring in, believing this year's Kumbh to be the most significant religious event of their lifetime.
Ishnan Garg in New Delhi, thank you very much. Let's take a look at the top business news. US consumer prices increased more than expected in January. The latest data reinforces the Federal Reserve's message that it was in no rush to resume cutting interest rates amid growing uncertainty over the economic impact of the Trump administration's policy. The consumer price index jumped 0.5% last month. Coca-Cola may have to sell more drinks in plastic bottles in America if President Trump's tariffs end up making aluminium cans more expensive. That's according to the company's CEO, James Quincy. It comes after Trump ordered a 25% import tax on all steel and aluminium entering the US, which could drive up prices of canned food and drink items in the country. Heathrow has unveiled a new multi-billion-pound investment in its existing terminals ahead of the push for a third runway. The CEO of the UK's biggest airport, Thomas Walby, says the upgrade will be funded entirely by private investment. Walby also said he sees a third Heathrow runway by 2035. Let's turn to sports news now. Manchester City collapsed in the final stages of their Champions League playoff first leg against Real Madrid. Pep Guardiola's side were 2-1 up with 5 minutes to go at the Etihad, but they crumbled in the last moments to lose 3-2. Midfielder Jude Bellingham claimed a last-gasp winner for Real Madrid. And one of England's most iconic football stadiums will host the Merseyside derby between Everton and Liverpool later on today. Goodison Park, which has been Everton's home since 1892, will be demolished after this season. The club is moving to a new venue at Bramley Moor Dock on Liverpool's waterfront. A reminder of our top stories. Israel's Prime Minister sends Hamas an ultimatum: return all remaining hostages by Saturday or the ceasefire is over. Elon Musk defends his hostile cost-cutting measures as he slashes the spending of the US federal government. And some breaking news. President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin say they've spoken for an hour and a half and will visit each other's countries. It comes as US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tells NATO it's a critical year for the Ukraine war as the third anniversary of the conflict approaches. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, Riz Khan meets the Latvian Prime Minister, followed by Melinda Nafoura's special interview with Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Haskell. And of course, don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. But good night and thank you for joining me.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. As the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine rapidly approaches, the war between the two nations shows little sign of easing. In fact, the knock-on effects of the conflict continue to have a geopolitically wider impact as some former Soviet nations increasingly distance themselves from Moscow and its influence. Russia's neighbor to the west, the small Baltic state of Latvia, has joined Estonia and Lithuania in officially cutting off its dependence on Russian electricity. The highly significant and symbolic move shifts the three Baltic nations from the Soviet-era grid they inherited more than 3 decades ago to the European energy network through Poland and Scandinavia. This latest move comes on top of Latvia's growing support of Ukraine through NATO, as well as other measures to protect itself from potential Russian aggression. Well, I attended the World Government Summit in Dubai, where I had the chance to sit down for a conversation in person with the Latvian Prime Minister. Evika Siliņa gave her perspective on the actions her nation is taking to strengthen itself against any possible backlash from Moscow, and how Latvians are handling a lingering time of uncertainty in the Baltic region. Prime Minister, it's great you could make some time at a very busy time for you and your country right now. In the past week, Latvia has joined its Baltic neighbours, Lithuania and Estonia, in severing ties with the Russian and Belarusian power grid. Why was this important, and how will the Baltic states guarantee energy security in the future?
Yes, it was a really hugest event on electricity. For 10 years almost, we have been preparing this, even maybe longer time. And European Union has invested more than €1 billion in this all the operation, because this was technically not so easy to be done. But we have been connected with Europe already before. Now we just get rid of this Belarusian and Russian grid. So it means we are more independent and more secure. And we will be now a part of Europe's electricity.
Do you expect it to have a major impact on Latvia, and what about on Russia?
It will have an impact on us that we will be able to plan our activities, because if we stayed as it was before with Belarus and Russia, we never could be it would never be reliable for us. They could always set some new rules. Therefore, for Europe, it's more sustainable and long-term our planning. So I believe it's better for our people's security and actually for prognosis. We can now prognose how we will boost up our energy, what we will do with the green energy, and it will help with prices as well.
What was the response from Moscow when you decided to make this move?
Actually, we didn't have any response. We just needed to apply, like in any agreement, 6 months before that we will be doing this, and that was this. They take it into account, never had any response back.
Some would expect Vladimir Putin not to be too happy, and there might be reprisals. Were you concerned about any reprisals from Russia?
There were some disinformation saying that there will be high prices coming up, and people were trying to, maybe people in Russia and Belarus were trying to scare us that there will be something unexpected happening, but we really did very well. I'm proud of what Baltic countries did together with European Commission, and nothing bad happened. So we actually were able to account all the risks, which includes disinformation, and we did well. I'm happy and I'm proud of what Baltic states succeeded.
Well, last November I had a chance to speak with your defense minister, Andris Sprudz, and it was a good conversation. One thing we did talk about that he was concerned about was the risk of hybrid warfare, or sometimes called grey warfare, that Russia is accused of engaging in and increasing now with damaging cables underwater in the Baltic Sea, possibly cybersecurity attacks. These are the accusations. How concerned are you that the hybrid war side is maybe cranking up against your country?
Hybrid war is actually a reality for us for almost, I would say, all the years of independence, since we got independence from Soviet Union, and we get used to it, but we as well get a good knowledge, and as Secretary General of NATO called it, hybrid threats are not just hybrid threats. It still remains terroristic attacks, but organized by some government. And this is the reality we are living on, and what it means to Latvia, to all the Baltic region, and actually to all the region, including Scandinavian countries. We need to be really able to detect where it comes from, what are the risks we are having, as you mentioned, with cables in Baltic Sea. With recent happenings in Baltic Sea, there was one cable which included Latvian cable and a Swedish cable. We didn't find any proof. Swedish authorities said there is no sabotage, but we know we have to be cautious, and that means we need to invest more in hybrid our capabilities and in defense and security.
Actually, Latvia had an issue with drones at its major airport, and I wonder if, from your opinion, this might have been just the work of individuals or actually potentially state-sponsored terrorism.
We don't have any proof that it is state-sponsored yet, but yes, we are building up our capabilities on how to detect drones, and we all have to be aware, because now war happens in electronic field. So we are preparing our drones, we are preparing our preparedness and deterrence in electronic war. And that's why I'm here today, to learn about artificial intelligence, what are the newest technologies, how we can help our drones on our technologies to help our country's security and for people's benefits.
Considering you share a 300-kilometer border with Russia, in your opinion, how has the relationship with Moscow changed since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022?
We have been, I would say, if in comparison with our neighbors, Ukrainians, we share the same history. Now we have different presence, and probably there is a common future for us together. Because I believe we were more successful of being EU member and NATO member. Therefore, Ukrainians need still to achieve those, I would say, issues and political results. But with Moscow, it always has been complicated, but they're still geographically our neighbors. And Belarus are pushing migrants, illegal migrants through our borders. We have to build a fence. So we are defending our borders. And unfortunately, there is no, progress in diplomatic relations, because we believe Ukraine must win the war. And there is law, international law, who says any country has its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and no one else can change their borders without that country's approval. So we are with Ukraine, and if Putin doesn't agree to that, unfortunately, we stay with democratic countries.
It's interesting what you said about the hybrid threat since you basically got independence. Some years back I was talking with the Estonian president, and the similar thing, and you know they had a fairly major cyber attack that pretty much shut down a lot of their country. I wonder how in these past couple of years since that full-scale invasion in Ukraine, how you and your neighboring Baltic states' relationship has changed.
Actually, for good. We have become stronger, and we are cooperating even more. And now we have become stronger within NATO, because 2 more countries in the region has joined NATO, Sweden and Finland. And definitely we are spending 3.45% of our GDP for defense, and all the Baltic countries are spending more. It means we have raised up our capabilities in defense and security. So there is something actually you can learn from us. And this is how we can detect hybrid threats, and cybersecurity is one of our highest priorities as well. But sure, in today's world, there is no way nothing will happen, but we are able to detect the risks, and our cybersecurity issues has become such a high level that they can deter and investigate very difficult cases. And we can publicly announce them for others to learn from our investigations.
Well, as you say, Finland and Sweden now part of the NATO family, and Sweden just had joint exercises, their first military exercises with NATO, and that happened actually in Latvia, from what I understand. So I'm wondering how significant that was.
Oh, wow, it was very significant. Sweden sent 500 troops to Latvia as their first mission within NATO. And therefore, really, we are stronger together. In Latvia, we have 14 nations working together within NATO, and we have built a good partnership within NATO countries. And I believe Latvia has a good talent of being maybe not a big country, but someone said about us from Ukrainian government, but a great nation. So we are hosting 14 countries within Latvia of NATO, and Sweden just joined us. And this is a good place where they can practice and practically see how NATO operates in a real life, like not a game in video, but in real life experience.
And as you indicated, Latvia has made major commitments to NATO in this respect. How do you think NATO will operate in any different way under Donald Trump, who's expressed his concerns?
We have worked with Donald Trump's administration before, when he was previously President of the United States. So we already, know a little bit of this new way of cooperation. For us, United States is a very significant partner, transatlantic partner, and as far as I could say, all the negotiations which we have had with new administration now, they really value how we have strengthened our defense capabilities and actually how we can be a loud voice in NATO, that defense is very important within NATO countries, with other allies. So I believe we will work on good cooperation even forward in future.
Donald Trump's second time around has been a lot more aggressive than the first time from what we see. What was your response when Donald Trump was doing his election campaigning and saying he would end the Russia-Ukraine conflict in a day? What went through your head?
I would say nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And we will look at this as an opportunity because we want a peace. For sure, everyone wants peace, and so many people have died in this war in Ukraine. Therefore, if Donald Trump can provide a peace for Ukraine, they can agree to. It's a good step forward. But it's very important that Ukrainians will say yes to that. Not someone else will make a deal. Therefore, everything about Ukraine with Ukraine remains from my side as a very strong word.
Understood. Now, Latvia has begun production of military armored vehicles. Is that, I mean, in response to Ukraine's needs, or is this also in response to Latvia's own security concerns?
Definitely, yes. We have actually been collaborating with other European countries for military industry, and we have found that we could be a good partners with bigger actually producers within Europe who has a very strong historical already manufacturing characteristics, abilities, and we are now one of the suppliers in a chain of military industry, and yes, we are producing Patrias armored vehicles. Part of them will be sent to Ukraine and part of them will stay with us, which can be used for our own security reasons.
And as indicated, Latvia's role in NATO has kind of stepped up quite a lot more recently with the potential threat with Russia. How is Latvia supporting Ukraine in that respect, for example, its bid for NATO membership?
We are supporting military, politically, by our NGOs, everyone, our society is supporting Ukraine. That's one big word I would say. And we are giving them 0.25% of our GDP for their military needs. So, and yes, if they want to be a member of NATO, we will be there to support them. It should be in a way when everyone else agrees, because that's how NATO makes decisions. But yes, we will try to be like a negotiator in between the countries, because we really share the same history what Ukraine shares, and we really understand the culture. So we will be there to support them politically.
Now, a few moments ago, you were saying how in recent years the Baltic nations have become much closer and stronger. I've also heard you say you believe that Europe in general has become much stronger as a union because of what happened with between Russia and Ukraine.
Yes, I would say there is always some issues where, politicians negotiate. That's the normal life. But a part of our main topics which we discuss in Europe is security. And I never have seen such a high priority before in Europe for security. But now Baltic states and Scandinavian countries are the ones who actually are pushing Europe to make faster decisions, as well for reducing bureaucracy. Why we need it? Because we need to be stronger in our economics. And therefore, all the countries in Europe understand that we need to move faster for making decisions. And that actually has made Europe to work stronger together.
And is there need for a European defense minister as such dedicated to this?
We actually have a commissioner of defense, and the one is our neighboring country, Lithuanian. And Mr. Kubilius now is taking a post of very high representative of European Commission as a commissioner, and he will be dealing with defense issues within Europe. So he has to come out with agenda and proposals, and the most discussable topic will be the financing of defense. But we actually already have started to discuss within the leaders.
Recent geopolitical tensions have got a lot of European nations debating the issue of conscription again. And I know in 2023, Latvia decided to have a lottery of conscription for men between 18 and 27, I think it is. And then there was talk about also conscription, military service for women too. How has that developed and how have Latvians reacted?
You know, it was really a historical decision for Latvia, and I would say it was not an easy decision, and we never knew how it will be seen in the public. But the first conscription went very well, and people who were called in, actually they do it first time by their free will. Now it's a lottery going on, and the outcome is really good. So some of the boys and the young men saying that those were the best year of my life. So those are really positive outcomes. But we are not ready yet for women. We will probably be able to discuss that question or decide something differently when there will be a certain time of conscription for young men. And only then, I believe, we will be able to discuss is there necessary to be a mandatory call for women. But now women can proceed as if they wish so, and I believe it's a good opportunity for them to decide.
From what I understand, Latvia has an ethnically Russian population of about 1 in 4, almost 25%, isn't it?
I'm not so sure, but could be, yeah.
The reason I ask is because there's also talk about Russia trying to create dissent within its neighbors through its ethnically Russian population. I wonder if that has surfaced at all in Latvia, or what sense of unity do you get between the people?
You know, to speak about that, you need to understand our history. And our history is that we are Latvia and we speak Latvian language. We have our own territory. Sure, Russian nation is big nation in comparison to Latvia. We are 1.8 million. So it means we understood that through 35 years, when we became independent from Russia, we needed to integrate all those people who actually did decide to stay in Europe, to stay in Latvia. And now we are going through our reform process of Latvian language within all the schools. So it helps them to integrate into our society in Europe, because Latvia is Europe, Latvia is NATO. And yes, there is languages for minorities as any other languages, and we see the Russian language as one of those minorities where always anyone who wants to speak in such language can take courses. But overall, the school education goes into Latvian language, and that's my government has done.
I think that's reflected in actually many of the former Soviet states, the kind of evolution. You know, the far-right European leaders held a rally in Spain at the weekend for this new movement, Make Europe Great Again. Why do you think Europe seems to be heading so much towards the right now? And should Latvia be worried about such a move?
I believe, sure, everyone now sees we are living in a I don't know how I can explain the speed of information and changes. And we all need to understand as the leaders of government that we need to change. We need to change within Europe. We need to change within our countries. We need to adjust to new reality of artificial intelligence, for example, and digital data. Because if we stay as we are, those new changes just will take place. And we will not be able to understand what's going on. Therefore, I believe, yes, we need to change as Europe, but of populistic movements, there always will be rising, and that's the reality we should live in. Therefore, the government should provide a good solution and vision for our society, how we can live in this time of change, because society always wants peace. They want something which is not changing so much, but therefore we need to change the systems for our society to feel good where they live and to feel secure and prosperous.
We discussed how Latvia has a strong history with not just NATO but the European Union, and I wonder what you believe are Latvia's priorities in helping to shape the future of the European Union, especially when it comes to the economic and security concerns.
For Latvia, security is one topic. I believe we have to find a solution, and we have been promoters and advisors for finding a European solution for security, which goes together with NATO capabilities, not like in a parallel process, but goes together, how we can comply together, how we can cooperate. Then one of the issues is stepping down these bureaucratic procedures, and our commissioner, who comes from Latvia, Valdis Dombrovskis, is now dealing with those issues for Europe to become more competitive, because I believe we have been over-regulating a lot in Europe, and this is something we really need to change. For us, as a smaller country, it's very important, because so many bureaucratic procedures for us, it's as well huge burden, and we need to find the good solutions. And AI, for example, is one of the good solutions, and one of our Latvian companies are actually working on all the Europe's solutions for reducing bureaucracy and working with those issues.
Prime Minister, what is your vision for Latvia's development over the next decade or so?
I believe Latvia should be a safe Latvian and prosperous nation who can live through all those changes of digitalization and artificial intelligence. So therefore, I believe if we can make a safe environment for our people, and you have to remember we are neighboring country with Russia and Belarus, so we always will be looking for safety. Then next, my priority is family affairs, because we don't have many people, so we need to think about families and those issues. Then economy and innovation. This is something where we really need to invest, and we need people and companies who can build startups, and Latvia is a good place for startups and fintechs. And the last one probably will be reducing bureaucracy, because to get to those first three ones, you need to get rid of bureaucracy. That's why I'm challenging those issues, and I really need support from my government colleagues and society.
Prime Minister Evika Silinia, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Prime Minister Evika Silinia there with a perspective on Latvia's geopolitical stance as a direct neighbour of Russia as tensions mount in the Baltics. We will, of course, keep an eye on that story. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to this special interview on Al Arabiya News. I'm Melinda Nusafora. The Gaza ceasefire is at risk of collapse. A little over halfway through phase 1 of the deal, and Hamas announced it was postponing the release of hostages, accusing Israel of violating the terms of the agreement. In response, Israel has threatened a return to war if hostages aren't freed on Saturday. For an update on the current situation, I'm joined by Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Haskell. Thank you so much for joining us, Deputy Minister.
Hello, it's a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me to your show.
Can we begin with some clarification on the comments we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu on Tuesday? Is Israel demanding Hamas release all Israeli hostages by noon on Saturday, or just the hostages that were already scheduled for release on the weekend?
So, look, obviously we are backing Trump's declaration asking to return all of the hostages. There's no reason for Hamas to hold our hostages and to prolong the situation. When we signed with Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, a ceasefire agreement, we knew we were signing a deal with a terrorist organization, and we knew they cannot be trusted. They violated the agreement from the start. For example, not giving us the list of the names of the people that are going to be released, or not until today, not giving the status of which hostage, in what condition they are. The fact that they didn't release Arbel Yehud, which she was meant to be released among the first one, was another violation, a brutal violation of the agreement as well. And now Hamas is coming and complaining about what we did because they didn't release Arbel Yehud, to wait with the returning of the Gazan citizen to the north until they release her, like they actually committed to. Well, it's absolutely unacceptable. And
so to clarify, Israel wants all hostages released on Saturday, which is a departure from what has been agreed to in phase one of the deal. On top of that, Hamas is saying the Gazan Health Ministry says more than 100 Gazans have been killed during a ceasefire. So does Israel take any responsibility for the current potential derailing of this ceasefire in phase one?
Hamas is the one that derailed this agreement from the start by not committing to what they signed on from day one. Now they're coming and complaining, is absolutely absurd. The fact that they declared today that they will not release the hostages on Saturday, as it was agreed, that's breaking the ceasefire agreement. And so that responsibility is on Hamas and Hamas alone.
So do you think the region should now be preparing for war?
Well, look, we knew from the start that signing an agreement with a terrorist organization is going to be difficult. This wasn't a good deal for Israel. This deal also released thousands of murderers, monsters who commit some of the worst crimes that you can ever imagine against innocent Israelis. And they were released without any restriction back into the civilization. And that's not a good deal, but it was a deal that we compromised on to make sure that our family members are going to be returned as quickly as possible. With the images that came on Saturday, knowing how they're abusing our family members, our brothers and our sisters, our husbands, our children, 2 babies, knowing that they're starving them, physically abusing them, emotionally, psychologically, torturing them. And now they dare to say they will not release the 4 hostages as they signed on the agreement. I think that calls on a breaking of the agreement. And we said from the start that if Hamas break the agreement they sign on, we will be prepared at any point of time to resume our war against Hamas.
There are some skeptics who would say that Israel never intended to negotiate to phase 2 and that it would return to the conflict, as some of the coalition partners within the government have always said they wanted. What would you say to that proposal?
Well, I say that Netanyahu arrived in Washington to start the negotiation on the second phase in good faith, with an open heart and an open mind. He sat with Witkoff and with Waltz, the people who are in charge of it from Trump's side, and we've outlined our needs and the framework that we need to continue for the next stage. Why would we do that if it wasn't in good faith to try and reach the second part or the next ceasefire that is going to release all of our family members? I mean, this is our goal. Our goal of Israel is not a war. Our goal is to release our family members as quickly and as safely as possible. And if we can secure that in a diplomatic solution, of course we'll prefer that. I mean, what else? After Netanyahu and Witkoff discussion, he went to Qatar to mediate with the prime minister of Qatar to see whether we can negotiate a deal. We sent a delegation to Doha just 2 days ago. So our intention is to try and mediate. Unfortunately, Hamas, time after time, a terrorist organization, has proven that it doesn't want a diplomatic solution. I mean, look on what had happened now. This ceasefire, this agreement, in August, it was on the table. Matter of fact, there were 3 propositions in August. The Qatari proposition, the Russian proposition, and the Egyptian proposition, to which Israel said yes to all of them. Hamas is the one that refused. Hamas is the one that didn't want that ceasefire. Matter of fact, they didn't even came to the table. We were mediating this deal with the countries who are the mediators, while Hamas refused to send representation to come and even speak about these propositions.
Well, let me put this to you then. If Hamas does release the hostages on Saturday, do you see this deal moving to phase 2 and the fighting not resuming? Is there still a chance for that?
I think that will be a good start. I really think it will be a good start. About the second stage, obviously, Israel outlined what is our needs. And our needs is to bring back all of our family members as quickly and as safely as possible, and to make sure that the 7th of October never happens again. I mean, remember, this is the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Those are crimes against humanity that were committed against innocent Israelis, including massacring babies, raping little girls, burning our grandparents alive. We need to make sure that something like that never happen again. And that's why Hamas and Hamas leadership, a terrorist organization that on record in interviews say that they will commit this crime over and over again. They will commit
one way that the US
one.
says it will prevent that from happening again is to move all the Palestinians out of Gaza. So if the US, as President Trump has declared, if the US is to take control of Gaza, what role would Israel play in that scenario?
I'll tell you what, I think it's still early to talk about inside details and you know, to focus on that.
But you have said that Israel supports the move.
These are details that are going to be outlined. But what I think about Trump's proposition is that everybody have to keep an open heart and an open mind about it, because every solution that was brought until now failed. And we paid the price for it. I mean, think about it. We've tried a territorial solution. We disengaged from Gaza in 2005, evacuating every single living Jew from Gaza. We pulled out all of our troops. We even took the dead who were buried there outside and buried them in Israel. And this territorial solution didn't work. They invested this independent territory into fighting for the complete obliteration of the state of Israel and murdering all the Jews. That's the platform of Hamas, and that's what they committed to. So this territorial solution did not work because it's not a territorial war. It's not a territorial dispute. This is a cultural and a religious dispute. And so when people came to us and said, okay, let's find an economic solution, give them some insight or something to aspire for. You know, they've invested billions of dollars in Gaza, including Qatar. We've actually given a lot of permits to Gazan residents to come and work in Israel. This was about 5 to 10 times more the salary that they earned in Gaza, in the hope of creating mutual life by giving them somewhat of a future. And it ended in the 7th of October massacre, the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. So we are the one who paid the price for a solution that didn't work.
That if the US were to take control of Gaza and relocate the Palestinian population, you risk radicalizing another whole generation of displaced people, which perhaps just raises the risk of there being more conflict.
So I want to say a few things about it. I think that, first of all, when we bring solutions that are outside of the box, we have to keep an open heart and an open mind, because the solution that didn't work until now means that we need to find other solutions. Now, Trump sees Gaza and the devastation there and says, we need to actually temporarily evacuate the Palestinians, rebuild it, and then get them back. But things need to be managed differently as well. I think this is something that all of us have to sit together and actually talk. And you know what? If that puts pressure on the Palestinians, I'm happy about it, because maybe now they'll be pressured to accept the Jews, to accept that we're not going to go anywhere either. And we have to find a solution to live side by side. So I welcome that. And another thing, and it's important to note as well, you talk to me about the radicalization of another generation. What had happened in Gaza until now? They have the UNRWA education system that they've been taught for. Okay, this is a radical jihadist education system
that has been disputed by the United Nations. So let's move on.
No, that's not true. The United Nations actually affirmed it, and we have mountains of research and evidence to show that children as young as 3 years old in the school camps of Hamas are being taught how to stab, how to shoot weapons,
the UN still
and how to murder
UNRWA.
Jews.
But let me ask you this, Deputy Minister. In Israel's mind, is a two-state solution officially off the table?
Well, I think that we cannot talk about it right now because we will not reward again the worst crime that was committed against the Jews since the Holocaust, the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, with a state. This would be actually like rewarding the worst terror act against our country. You know what we need to talk about? We need to talk about the Palestinian leadership. And we need a brave Palestinian to rise up and to actually say, I want to create a better future for my people. I accept the state of Israel will not go anywhere. And I want to find a solution when we can live side by side. When there's going to be a Palestinian leader that can say that in Arabic, not in English, but in Arabic to its own people, that will be the first step about reconciliation, about building a bridge between the two people. But until now, there isn't a single Palestinian leader that can actually say that.
Saudi Arabia has reiterated that there will be no normalization of relations with Israel without the declaration of or the intention of a two-state solution. So is Israel willing to abandon efforts to re-establish a relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Look, I think that many things were said before, okay? And I think that also everybody claimed that peace is not a possibility without a Palestinian solution. Well, there was a peace agreement signed with Egypt without the Palestinian. There was a peace agreement.
But Saudi Arabia has reiterated in recent days, as early as
the Abraham
quickly
Accord.
as Sunday,
and I want to say
that they want a two-state solution before they will normalise relations. Is Israel willing to relinquish all the work that's been done until now?
I think that many statements of many Arab leaders before that stated that thing as well were proven that peace is actually something more important than anything. And I think that MBS, being an advanced leader that is aspiring also, and I've seen some of his reform and how he's been modernizing the country. I look at his statement, and his statement that said that peace with Israel or normalization with Israel is a strategic asset. And it is. And I think that that's the place where we need to start from.
Do you fear, though, that Prime Minister Netanyahu's rhetoric, his actions, have lost the goodwill of the Saudi Arabian kingdom and its people and has perhaps damaged the work that's been done until now?
Absolutely not. I think on the contrary. Look, we've had the worst years in the Middle East. Years of instability, years of war with so many deaths. We need stability. And when Trump came in with a very brave and confronting declaration about Lebanon, it brought a ceasefire and it brought stability to Lebanon. And we hope that Lebanon is going to grow out now from the Iranian occupation and liberate its economy and liberate its society and liberate its politics. Those grandiose declarations that you might find provocative actually created stability and actually can create bridges. It brought the ceasefire. That's the same with Hamas, with his grandiose declaration. Trump is the reason why Hamas actually came to the negotiation table. Trump and his declaration is what signed this ceasefire. And I think that some of these declarations are actually putting more pressure for stability in our region. We know who our enemy is. And the radicalization of different groups comes from one source. The funding of those groups come from one source. And that is a mutual enemy. And stability is the greatest weapon against them. And I think that this is a strategic asset and a bridge that we need to build between allies.
Just finally, Deputy Foreign Minister, does Israel still support the idea that a Palestinian state should be created on Saudi Arabian land?
I haven't heard a suggestion like that.
The Prime Minister himself made a comment along those lines. Is that something being discussed in Israel?
So I didn't read or am aware of any declaration like that. So if I'm not aware of a suggestion like that, I'm not sure it actually exists.
He did actually suggest during his visit to the US that the Palestinians should be moved to a territory in Saudi Arabia. Do you think that that's a viable option?
I say again, I heard the declarations of Prime Minister. I watched the declaration of President Trump. I did not encounter any declaration like that.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you bringing us up to date on where Israel stands in this very precarious time. Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Haskell, thank you for joining us on Al Arabiya News.
Thank you very much.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Rizkan Show for empowering conversation.
Hi Scott, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. So we're here at the Festival of Golf. As you can hear, it's all lively in the background. The Live season opener in Riyadh. What are your expectations for this weekend?
Well, first starts with fun and probably ends with families. And so having our first round last night, which was so exciting, it is my first Live event. And just to walk the course and see people smiling, you might hear the music in the background. We have music playing, we have DJs in our neon forest. And we have a fan zone that's to the likes I've never seen before. And the Backstreet Boys are playing tonight. So, I mean, when are you going to come to a golf tournament? See the greatest stars in the world. You got DJ, you got Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau, Waco Neiman. I mean, it is a who's who of golf and pretty fun.
There's something for everyone, as you said, at the Backstreet Boys. I know a lot of the non-golf fans who are here are looking forward to that as well. There's also another first here. The tournament is being played under lights. What was the inspiration for that?
Well, you know, we have an incredible leader in His Excellency, Yasser Rahman, and he thought, hey, what an incredible opportunity to play at night. It'd be the first time it's ever been done before. We're in Riyadh, which is wonderful for television back in the US. You might know we have a new deal with Fox, so it puts the broadcast times in the right zone. It gives the players kind of an opportunity to test and try something new. And we have stars in this league that want to do something different. And I think it gives us an opportunity to showcase innovation, do something new and fun, and hit some broadcast windows in the U.S. that are helpful.
Of course, absolutely, and we'll get to that point on Fox in a moment. So here it is, it's growing as a golf hub. What is the main driver behind that? Obviously, Liv is hugely involved in this. Where do you see the game growing over the next 5 years?
Well, there are so many incredible golf projects in the kingdom. I mean, you have Dariyah Gate, the project Greg Norman designed. You have what's happening in Qadiyah with those two beautiful courses down there. And it was just with a gentleman from Neom, which seems like that's going to be incredible too. So first off, it starts with the quality of golf courses. You clearly have commitment in this market. They continue to showcase, as we have here, a spectacular golf course and continuing the fandom to build. And I think that momentum is really going to help us for the next 5 years.
Absolutely. What are your favorite aspects of the Live model? Obviously, like we've got the music here behind, the team aspect. Why do you think that is growing at such a fast rate in comparison with the PGA? Average age of the fans in the PGA is in the 60s. The average age of Live fans is now in the 30s. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite aspect is the team aspect. I was with Sergio Garcia yesterday having lunch, and he was talking about how passionate he was about helping his guys, Luis and Puig and Abraham, kind of emerge and develop. I mean, and that to me is the specialness of this model. You have the greats of the game with an opportunity to kind of carry forward this next generation and help them emerge, not only as professionals and elite golfers, but also as human beings. And I think that's what brings me the most joy.
And kind of speaking about the human being aspect, I was lucky enough to walk the course behind Bryson DeChambeau last night, at Cameron Smith, at Dustin Johnson. These guys are just incredible.
You can't believe how athletic they are, right?
Yeah.
Like Bryson's drives, DJ's raw athleticism, and Cam's short game, you actually got to see it all. Like, that is the best of the best on display.
Yes, and that is why, so like in terms of viewership, obviously you're competing against the PGA. As you mentioned earlier, you've just signed the deal with Fox as well as ITV in the UK.
It's a wonderful
You're
deal.
really starting to compete now for viewership with the PGA. This must be very exciting.
Yeah, I prefer like kind of co-opetition. I mean, I think all of us in the golf ecosystem, a rising tide lifts all boats. I don't think we're getting anywhere near scratching the surface in terms of the opportunity we have to drive more fans, golfers and non-golfers alike, into this golf family. Our household viewership opportunity in the 100 countries where we're broadcast is almost 800 million homes.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so we have such opportunity ahead and such good momentum so far. And I'm rooting for the PGA Tour to do really well. I'm rooting for the DP Tour to do really well. And Live is what I'm really passionate about.
And you yourself have had an incredible career, obviously, in the States. You've managed some of the biggest sports franchises in the world. What fundamentals from managing those are you going to bring into Live to help further the game for Live?
Well, the fundamentals are very similar. You know, if you look at the business model here, it's TV. And so we've made some good progress as of late. We have a ways to go, but incredible progress with Fox and ITV, among others around the world. Our sponsorship base, if you don't have to look too far, then over my right shoulder to see Madden come in as one of the top. It's one of the 6 largest mining company in the world with a world-class CEO. Riyadh Air, Roshan, and our good friends in Bahrain. So we have a great sponsorship base, and that's going to have to continue to grow around the world. But we've had such incredible support from the region here, which has been great. And then, you know, look, we need more people coming. We need more people watching, reading, wearing our merchandise. Get this vest at a store near you, and experiencing this incredible hospitality. So I would just encourage you to give it a try. If you have a chance to come out and see a Live event, it is probably like no event you've ever been to in your life. It is fun, it's engaging, it's family friendly, and you get to see more stars than you see in any constellation in the sky.
Agreed about that. It was incredible last night. So you have come into Live at somewhat of an interesting time. Obviously, there's a lot of talk of allegiances with the PGA as well as the DP World Tour. Are you the man to achieve that goal? Is that something you want?
This is not, it never has been, never will be, it never could be about any one person. This is led by our incredible chairman. We have an incredible staff. And we have a golf industry that, as they say, inshallah, is actually pulling together and wanting to do what's best for the game of golf, to grow the game of golf, to come together and to make sure that everywhere around the world, golf fans are satisfied with what they're getting in terms of coverage and access to events.
President Donald Trump has recently met with the PGA Commissioner as well as Adam Scott, who also works for the PGA, to discuss a potential merger. There has been a lot of talk about this. Donald Trump has said on his campaign trail that in 15 minutes and one phone call, he could get a deal done. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that if the leader of the free world is spending his time on golf, I am very happy. This game matters. It's one of the great life teachers in the world. It gives values that this world needs more of right now. It brings us together with connectivity. It gets us outside. It gets our phones in our pockets. It teaches us integrity and resilience and consistency, all things we all need to be successful in this world. And if there's commitment for all sides to bring the game together, which is good for the game of golf, I couldn't be happier.
Have you spoken with Trump?
I have not.
Okay,
but
we
are playing at his golf course in Miami in a few weeks. So you know.
And he is a fantastic golfer, obviously, with kind of break 50 with Bryson, who's obviously doing huge numbers online. That's been incredible to watch. Yeah. Another point, the US Championship announced on Wednesday that it will accept players from LIV. This is a huge coup, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if it's a coup. The RNA announced this similarly today. So for the Open Championship, we'll see the same in Northern Ireland this year. So very exciting. For us, is, you know, when you look at, when you consider the majors, the biggest stage in the world for the biggest stars in the world, and it's obviously the Masters at Augusta and the PGA of America, PGA Championships, and then the US Open and the Open Championships. They want the best stars in the world, and we have quite a few of them. And so I think when there's an opportunity to put those two things together, good things will happen. And we're really pleased and grateful and appreciative of this, you know, the olive branch and the step forward. We've got great leaderships in the organizations that matter, and we're thrilled to be a part of it.
I'll just end on quickly. Do you have a favorite golfer who plays elsewhere that you would like to see in LIV?
No. I have one favorite golfer. That's my father-in-law. I have to love him for something.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to seeing him on the course soon.
Okay, good. You will soon.
Thanks so much, Scott. A pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Delhi. India's capital, Delhi is known for its captivating sights and rich history. The city is beautified with mosques, forts, and monuments, and the popular landscaped gardens. There is a bustling Old Delhi and the well-planned New Delhi, each with their own attractions and both worth the exploration. One of the most popular in Delhi is the Jama Masjid Mosque. You must catch the breathtaking view of Old Delhi that you'll see from the top of the minaret in the mosque. The long and winding, strenuous climb to the stairs will all be worth it. The Jama Masjid is indeed a treasure of the old city and is the largest mosque in India. It was built in 1650 and in fact took 13 years to build. The Red Fort, Delhi's most famous monument, is one of the most popular remnants of the Mughal emperor's rule. It stands for a stretch of up to over 2 kilometers or 1.2 miles. It was built in 1638 to keep out invaders from entering the city. The Red Fort is a great way to see the very ancient historic side of the city. Another historical site worth a visit is Gandhi Smriti. It is where Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation, was assassinated on January 30, 1948. The legendary man lived in the house for 144 days up until the time of his death. You can visit these places as they are open to the public. Historical feats aside, there are also many places in Delhi for sports, recreation, food, and shopping. There is also the Chandni Chowk, the main street of Old Delhi. It's a shocking contrast to the wide, orderly streets of New Delhi. Vehicles of all sorts crowd the space. With the pedestrians and animals, there are cars, cycle-rickshaws, and hand-pulled carts everywhere you look. But the trip is worth the narrow, winding lines full of things to buy: affordable jewelry, fabrics, and electronics. Plus, you can also sample the local street food here. Last but not least are of course the famous Lodi Gardens. It's a fitting balance to the bustling city life in Old and New Delhi. It's a serene retreat from city life, a place to rest, reflect, and relieve yourself from a tiring trip. Tourists also visit to see the birds, eat along the restaurants, or simply enjoy the nature escape.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, despite the firm opposition of the visiting King of Jordan and other leaders of Arab nations, President Donald Trump once again states his plan for the US to take over Gaza and for displaced Palestinians to be housed in Jordan and Egypt. Israel and the United States tell Hamas to release hostages this weekend, or face a return to war, leaving mediators scrambling to salvage the Gaza ceasefire deal. Also coming up, we're going to be speaking to Scotland's former First Minister Hamza Yousaf, whose in-laws were trapped in Gaza at the start of the Israeli invasion. We'll be getting his reaction to the latest proposals regarding the future of the Palestinian territory. Hello and welcome to the programme. The US President Donald Trump has reiterated his plan to take over the Gaza Strip, and he did so on Tuesday in the presence of the visiting King Abdullah of Jordan at the White House. Well, this was their first meeting since President Trump announced his proposal to take over the territory and move its 2 million Palestinians to other countries, amongst them Jordan.
And with the United States being in control of that piece of land, a fairly large piece of land, you can have stability in the Middle East for the first time. And the Palestinians, or the people that live now in Gaza, will be living beautifully in another location. They're going to be living safely. They're not going to be killed, murdered, and having to leave every 10 years, because I've been watching this for so many years. It's nothing but trouble.
The US President speaking there. Well, Jordan's King Abdullah II has announced that his country will take in 2,000 sick children from Gaza in an effort to ease US President Donald Trump's pressure on Jordan to accept Palestinian refugees. Well, when asked by reporters if Jordan was prepared to take in more Palestinians from Gaza, King Abdullah refrained from answering directly. Instead, he pointed to Egypt's broader international standing, which aligns with the two-state solution. Egypt, which the White House has also engaged, is expected to present proposals in response to President Trump's plan on behalf of the Arab League. Well, President Trump has stated, though, he is 99% certain he will reach an agreement with Cairo.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, the president is looking at Egypt coming to present their plan. As I said, we will be in Saudi Arabia to discuss how we can work with the president and with the United States. So I think let's wait until the Egyptians can come and present it to the president and not get ahead of ourselves.
Well, for more, we can speak now to Thomas Pickering, who is the former US ambassador to Jordan. Ambassador Pickering, it's great to have you with us again here on Al Arabiya News. You know King Abdullah of Jordan. You've known him from even the days when he was the Crown Prince of Jordan before he became king. I expect you were watching the developments at the White House on Tuesday evening. Have you ever seen him looking quite so uncomfortable?
I don't know that it was
the most pleasant experience that he could have undergone. But I thought that he handled it with control, with clear determination, and with a sense that he wanted to get through that particular episode, if I could call it that, without risking American support, which is very significant financially for Jordan on the one hand, or the reputation that he has developed in the Arab world of sticking with the general consensus of Arab views, and that meant not accepting to buy into the expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza, which is a primary preoccupation of Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli right wing, and happens to be contrary to international law, among other things. And I thought his idea of welcoming 2,000 injured, sick, disabled, otherwise children from Gaza for treatment in Jordan was a sensible, honest, and decent thing to do in a useful way to come in the direction of what people were asking him to do without putting himself in the difficulties that I just outlined.
I mean, do you think he managed to get across Jordan's point of view to President Trump? And do you think we're likely to get any indication that President Trump is going to have a rethink about this, this plan for Gaza?
Yes and no are my answers to your questions. It would be difficult for President Trump to ignore what he had to say. And I don't know what he said in the private meeting, but what he had to say in the public meeting was a gentle conveyance of a determination that I thought was real. And from my knowledge of Crown Prince Abdullah, now King Abdullah, I thought that was very straightforward. But in the long record of the kind of politeness and the kind of dignity and respect which the Hashemite rulers of Jordan have exhibited in their long periods of rule in the countries concerned. They may be criticized on other grounds, but I find it hard to see that people can lay a hand on them, so to speak, with respect to those particular assets and attributes of respect and dignity that are part of a good behavior pattern in their part of the world.
Indeed. And I mean, we heard President Trump saying that King Abdullah and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt would, quote, come around to his idea. I mean, knowing King Abdullah as you do, I mean, how do you think it goes down with him to hear from the US president that he will come around to this way of thinking? I mean, it's not exactly
we have all gotten
language.
Used to President Trump's way of speaking and understand what it means and understand that it is part of his negotiating tactics in terms of seeking to find an answer to a problem which is not working out to his advantage, which he can find a way to turn in that direction. In diplomacy, we call it creating negotiating leverage, and it can take many forms.
One of the other things President Trump said is, I believe we've got a parcel of land in Jordan. I believe we've got a parcel of land in Egypt. What's he talking about?
I don't know. Well, I think that he has been suggesting for some time, point one, that the people of Gaza be moved to Egypt and to Jordan. He's a real estate entrepreneur of significant reputation. To move people, you have to have land. To get land, you have to have acquiescence of the government. He is making a statement that I think he hoped would be accepted in a public way. It was not, but it was not rejected in a public way, which puts him in the middle. And he had enough good sense at that particular point in the conversation, I think, not to try to make a scapegoat or a victim or indeed an undignified approach himself to King Abdullah, who had been treating him with dignity and respect throughout the conversation.
Yeah, when you hear President Trump saying that this idea of taking control of Gaza and turning it into the Riviera of the Middle East, he says this plan is going to bring peace to the region. As someone who knows the region, do you agree with that assessment?
I don't think so. And in my last interview with you, I foreshadowed that this was coming because it's been apparent that it is a preoccupation of Prime Minister Netanyahu and the people who support him, and his particular political position is at risk under current circumstances, and everything he can deliver to his supporters, either via President Trump or from President Trump to President Sisi or King Abdullah, is something that's useful in his being able to manage continued leadership in Israel, and incidentally, in that fashion, stay away from the pending look by the Israeli political system at the concerns and failures of their intelligence establishment and indeed of their military posture that led to the unfortunate and deadly successful attack of Hamas in southern Israel on October 7th.
Some people have said that this plan to relocate Gazan civilians in Jordan and in Egypt would threaten the survival of Jordan. And as someone who served there as US ambassador, I just wonder if you could tell us why people are saying that and whether or not you agree with it.
Well, I think in part that's based on the data that Jordan now has in its population, a majority. I don't know the exact figures of citizens of Jordan whose origin is in Palestine to the west of Jordan and who have mainly come as refugees from the conflicts beginning with Israel's War of Independence in 1948, but following on. And that particular number of people would be close to being increased by a very significant percentage if 2.3 million people from Gaza are in one way or another pushed out, a large percentage of whom apparently, in the eyes at least of Prime Minister Netanyahu and maybe President Trump, would be destined for Jordan. And so Jordan would assume an absolute majority of Palestinian refugees among its population. Jordan has, for years, under the leadership of King Abdullah's father, granted citizenship to Palestinian refugees, something that I believe is extremely rare in the rest of the Arab world, if not non-existent. And in doing so, they have rights to participate in political decision-making in the electoral processes that take place in Jordan, mainly through the election of legislative representatives to the Jordanian parliament.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm told we're out of time, but really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. The former US ambassador to Jordan, Thomas Pickering. Thanks as ever.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, in tandem with President Trump's message, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has set a deadline for Hamas to release all hostages still being held in Gaza by midday on Saturday. He has warned that the alternative would be an end to the ceasefire and a resumption of military activity.
In light of Hamas's announcement of its decision to violate the agreement and not release our hostages, last night I ordered the military to gather forces inside and around the Gaza Strip. This operation is being carried out at this time. It will be completed in the very near future. If Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday noon, the ceasefire will end. and the military will return to intense fighting until Hamas is finally defeated.
The Israeli Prime Minister speaking there. Well, we can speak now to Itamar Rabinovich, former Israeli ambassador to the United States and former chief negotiator to Syria. Ambassador, great to have you with us once again on Al Arabiya News. Mediators are working hard to try and save the ceasefire deal for Gaza. Can it be saved, or is it going to collapse?
I think it can be saved, and the fact that Hamas issued its ultimatum early in the week indicates to me that they wanted to give it enough time to be settled before the deadline of the weekend. So my sense is that it is doable.
Okay, and if all the hostages are returned in line with that demand, what's the next step? What does Israel do then?
No, the actual Israeli demand is for the 3 hostages designated to be returned over the weekend to be returned. Israel also indicated that it wanted all hostages to be returned in a final deal, and that is because this is a demand presented by President Trump, and clearly the Israeli government could not seem less patriotic than Mr. Trump.
Okay, so President Trump, as we've heard, has said that hell would break loose, or words to that effect, if all the hostages are not returned by midday on Saturday. I mean, what are we talking here? What does all hell break loose mean?
It's unfortunately, it's a pretty vague threat. President Trump also said that no American money would be spent and no American soldiers would be sent. So who is to wreak hell on Hamas? Obviously, what he means is that he would not curtail any Israeli activities, but we Israelis are not really interested in going back to the war. I think we want to end the war, not to give it a new push. So the whole set of pronouncements by President Trump over this issue are a bit problematic.
Problematic because hasn't he slightly shot himself in the foot, in the sense that this deal, which was achieved after a great deal of effort over several months, not least during the transition period between the 2 presidencies in the United States, now looks like it's been, it's in a state of confusion. It's no longer the clear deal that it was. Is that what you mean?
More than that. I mean, first of all, that deal took a long time to negotiate, and it's not a perfect deal. It has quite a few deficiencies, and actually changing the deal or improving the deal may not be such a bad idea. But the problem goes deeper than that, because President Trump's pronouncements, to begin with, presented 2 old, well-established allies of the United States, namely Jordan and Egypt, in a very awkward position. We could see the King of Jordan during his visit to the White House and how awkward he felt at the time, because neither Jordan nor Egypt wants to take a large number of Palestinians from Gaza into their territory. It would run counter to what we can call the Arab consensus, would present them with a huge problem with their own populations. So President Trump has put 2 old American allies in a very awkward position. And secondly, he has played into the hands of the extreme messianic right wing in Israel, because they now feel that, well, if President Trump is on our side, let's push it. Let's continue the war. Let's establish settlements in Gaza. These are the voices you hear from the messianic Israeli right that feels that the wind that President Trump put in their sails is working in their favor.
Indeed, and your Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has called Donald Trump's relocation plan, quote, revolutionary. And I'm just wondering, aside from the far-right elements that you just described there, how widely shared is that opinion, do you think, in Israel? No,
there is a strong right wing. Of of which Mr. Netanyahu himself is part. There are radical right-wingers in his own party, in his coalition. Not everybody is messianic and extremist, but there are right-wingers, quite a few. But since Mr. Trump became President of the United States, the rules of the game in American and international politics seem to have changed, at least for now. And everybody wants to please Mr. Trump. Everybody is afraid of Mr. Trump. And everybody wants to flatter Mr. Trump. So if President Trump, during a meeting with Netanyahu, surprises him with this revolutionary off-the-cuff presentation, then the Prime Minister of Israel has to join in and praise it and play by the new rules of the game in international politics.
And what are we hearing from the families of the hostages still being held in Gaza? They must be extremely concerned that deal to release them is in jeopardy. First of all, the families of the hostages who are going to be released as part of the current phase of the deal. And then, of course, those who have to wait for further negotiations. So all are concerned that these, call it exercises in diplomacy, could cost the lives of their beloved. And you alluded to the fact that this idea was an off-the-cuff plan. I just want to get your sort of a little bit more detail on what you really think of the plan. Some have called it reckless, some have called it provocative, some have called this plan for Gaza half-baked and unworkable. What do you think?
Unworkable is the right term because, first of all, the whole idea of transferring 2 million people out of Gaza to work, which country would want to absorb these Palestinians from Gaza? And secondly, we know that this statement was not preceded by the normal staff work that you have in the normal conduct of foreign policy. Normally, if the president has such an idea, and then a couple of days before the meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel, this normally should be presented to the National Security Council and to other professional staff, get their feedback. And I'm sure many of them would have said that it's not workable and makes no point. But we know, the second term is still fresh, but we had Trump for a full term. And we know that part of his style is to present a very radical idea in order to settle on something more moderate. This happened several times. So if it all ends up by the Arab world rallying to the cause and presenting a workable plan to rehabilitate Gaza and to put a normal government, not a Hamas government, in place, then the end result could be positive, but we're not there yet.
The Israeli Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich, said shortly after President Donald Trump won the election that 2025 was going to be the year of, quote, sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. He's referring to the West Bank. I mean, is there a feeling, do you think, in Israel that perhaps the West Bank, with rising tensions, could be the next arena for a very serious conflict?
Well, there is violence in the West Bank while we are speaking now. Mr. Smotrich belongs to the camp or the faction that I described as messianic right wing. He has long advocated these views, annexing the West Bank. He published them in an article in 2017 before he was a cabinet member. It's called Bezalel Smotrich's Decision Plan. It was published in 2017. Many Israelis, myself included, think that these are hallucinatory ideas because if Israel annexes the West Bank with its population, Israel would lose either its Jewish character or its democratic character. Because if you give them citizenship, then it would become a binational state. If you don't give them citizenship, it will become a non-democratic state. So I and many others think that this is a very bad idea. And we hope that it will not become government policy.
And just lastly, Ambassador, I mean, obviously decades of diplomacy have tried to bring about a Palestinian state. There obviously still isn't one. Do you think there ever will be?
A Palestinian state, in the full sense of the term, is not available around the corner because the Palestinian Authority, the entity that should become the government of the Palestinian state, is in bad shape. It's considered to be corrupt and inefficient. It needs to be overhauled. So if we designate an idea that we resume negotiations with the Palestinians with the notion of Palestinian statehood further down the road, I think this should satisfy the Arab world, Saudi Arabia included, and would be more realistic than expecting a Palestinian state around the corner, which is a pipe dream and not a reality.
Okay. Former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Itamar Rabinovich, thank you very much indeed for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get some more reaction and analysis now. We can speak to Mark Polymeropoulos, who's a former senior intelligence officer for the CIA. Thanks so much for joining us, Mark. You spent years in the Middle East, 26 years precisely, covering Middle East, Europe, Eurasia, and counter-terrorism issues. Just like to pick your brains here and ask you what you think the US intelligence community, especially people in your orbit who know this region, the Middle East region, what they make of President Trump's plan to take over the Gaza Strip.
Well, it's good to be with you. I think probably the word to use is this is preposterous, or words to use, preposterous and also dangerous. I think this has probably given every CIA station chief in the Middle East a giant migraine headache. And frankly, I watched the events yesterday and I felt sorry for King Abdullah. I spent a lot of time in Jordan working with the Jordanian government. And this put Jordan, a key U.S. ally, in an impossible situation. I think Abdullah, while he was awkward, managed this quite deftly. He offered to take in 2,000 sick kids from Gaza, but he can never agree to this plan, which is, of course, akin to ethnically cleansing Palestinians, which is immoral in the first place, but also the ingest of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians into Jordan would destabilize his kingdom. Those of us who know the Middle East remember 1970 and Black September, where King Abdullah's father, King Hussein, was battling the PLO at the time. And so this is really anathema to the Jordanian security services, certainly not in the interest of Jordan, a key U.S. ally. And I will also mention that for the United States, Jordan is what we call a lily pad for U.S. interests there. We work on counterterrorism issues, counterproliferation issues, and I'll say very clearly from U.S. intelligence, hundreds of Americans have been saved by the Jordanians, and they're a very capable security apparatus. So altogether, really kind of a migraine-inducing headache for intelligence personnel, U.S. intelligence personnel in the region.
Yeah, I mean, could this end up costing the United States some important allies in the Middle East region, this idea?
Well, I think King Abdullah, who of course is does rely on over $1 billion in U.S. aid, has to really kind of be very careful on this. But he also, and the Jordanians also, if this goes through, would look to other sources of funding, whether it's the Saudis and then, God forbid, in the United States case, perhaps the Chinese. But I think there's something to be said also, even just the words that are being used. It's almost a calling card for Islamic extremists. I mean, when President Trump says things like owning Gaza, taking over Gaza, we have to remember that, and I was there for this, of course, the rise of al-Qaeda in the 90s was based on Osama bin Laden's critique of U.S. forces stationed in Saudi Arabia. And so this kind of inflammatory, triggering language that's being used, and I do think it's preposterous, but it doesn't matter. There could be second-order effects, and I'm sure that the U.S. and our allies in the counterterrorism world, our Arab allies in the region, are really monitoring terrorist cells or Islamic extremist forums. Is this a calling card for attacks against the United States and our allies as well? So I really think there's an effect on this, even, as you note, if this doesn't happen, but even with our allies and with certainly kind of U.S. and our allies' interests in the region.
What do you make of President Trump's understanding of the, in some cases, pretty complex dynamics of the Middle East region?
That's a great question, because I don't think, he has quite any really kind of historic understanding of it, and everything in the Middle East has to do with history. But number two, I also don't think he's listening to his advisors. I can't think of anyone from the State Department, from the CIA, my old organization, from the Department of Defense, and even some of, our Arab allies, and of course the Israelis as well. No one would think this is a good idea. And so I don't think he listens. Obviously, there's this notion of real estate that he is so focused on. I think it probably comes from his background. Also, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, has talked about the Riviera and Gaza before. Perhaps he's influenced by the Israeli right as well. I mean, the Israeli right wing certainly has talked about ethnically cleansing Gaza before. But for people who really know the region, I think they're not really getting through to him. And to me, that's a concern, because yesterday what we saw in the press conference, he didn't just double down, he tripled down on this idea, really in the face of significant global opposition. So I don't think he's listening.
You mentioned your former colleagues at the CIA, the State Department. Let's also think about the FBI as well. I mean, these are institutions of the United States that have kept the United States safe for decades, ever since those institutions were established. But morale in all of those institutions pretty low at the moment, isn't it? With, some pretty major changes afoot. At least that's what we've been given to understand by Elon Musk, for example. I mean, combined with what you've just been saying about the threat to U.S. national security by these comments that have been issued by President Trump, I mean, how dangerous are things looking for the United States at this particular moment?
I do think we're at an inflection point, because while I think everyone who worked in government, and I certainly did, I could argue all day with you that we do need reform. There are things in the intelligence community, in the FBI, other parts of the U.S. government that certainly are not efficient, that do need people to take a second look at it. But that's not what this is. This is taking a sledgehammer to national security institutions. And when you see these reports of potential purges in the FBI, 6,000 special agents potentially on the chopping block, or at my old institution, the CIA, where they're offering these early retirement. And in addition, sending names of kind of the junior officer cadre down to the Office of Management Budget for potential cuts. This makes no sense. This is decades of experience walking out the door, and the next generation also at risk. And, America is not going to be safe if we let talent depart. This is, again, not government reform. This is kind of eviscerating the civil service. The American people have always kind of complained at times that the government is too bloated, but I don't think this is what they want. And unfortunately, I think it's going to, if this does go through, it's going to take some really bad events to demonstrate that this was all a very poor exercise. So I am absolutely concerned about the national security ramifications of what seems to be not government reform, but really eviscerating key national security institutions.
Some of the people in President Trump's inner circle say that he's simply questioning conventional wisdom, and he's done this before, and he can claim to his credit he has achieved breakthroughs in the Middle East before, notably in the form of the Abraham Accords. Could we be misinterpreting? I mean, I think I know the answer to your question, but is there a glimmer of hope, or is there a glimmer of chance that we have misinterpreted the president, and this is simply a series of tactics, positioning, posturing, just to sort of gauge the temperature before making any decisions?
So, this is an argument that I hear from, many of my, friends in Republican circles, and my response to that is pretty clear. Look, there's always room for new and novel thinking. Those of us who have worked, for example, on the peace process for decades, there is some disillusionment that we haven't made progress. But kind of these ideas that President Trump throws out have these second order effects of doing what? Of destabilizing our allies in Jordan and in Egypt, of causing, as I just explained before, potential increase in terrorism threats to the United States when he talks about owning or taking over Muslim land. And so I'm all for new thinking. I'm all for new, fresh ideas, but you have to be really careful, and you would have to certainly listen to experts to say, well, hold on a second. If you say this, about kind of this forced removal of Palestinians from Gaza, this can really go south in a lot of ways. Even if you think that's just going to spur new thinking, there also could be some very damaging effects. So I understand when people say, hey, it's always good for new ideas, but you got to be really careful, particularly in this region, in what you put forth. And in this case, the idea of, in essence, the United States, advocating for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza. Remember, President Trump said they're not going to be welcome back. That, to me, is not new ideas to spur debate. That's really damaging.
One former senior FBI official by the name of Christopher O'Leary, who's got vast experience on counterterrorism, says that this kind of language being used by President Trump could prompt militants to start focusing on American nationals abroad. I mean, particularly he was talking about Palestinian militants. He says that's something that hasn't happened since the 70s and the 1980s. I mean, do you think that's a real risk now?
Well, I think it is a real risk because we have to, remember that, what we've seen for decades. And one of the first operational desks I sat on at CIA was the Hamas desk in the mid 90s. And so what we've seen is Hamas, for example, has had traditionally a very capable fundraising apparatus globally. But we did not see, frankly, Hamas launching operations against, for example, Americans abroad. It would be very easy, in my view, that you would take this fundraising network and you operationalize it. Terrorist cells then can use these contacts and networks to launch attacks. And again, if we're talking about ethnically cleansing Palestinians, that's going to, I think, for a lot of right reasons, anger a lot of people in the Arab world. And the worst case scenario is that terrorist groups such as Hamas or perhaps Palestine Islamic Jihad or even others kind of piggyback on top of that and advocate for attacks on Americans. So even just this language I think is very inflammatory. And I would have liked to see, President Trump walk this back, but he doubled down on it yesterday. I can't imagine a U.S. official overseas dealing with our interlocutors in the Arab world having to explain why it's okay that the U.S. would, quote, own Gaza. And so I think it really is going to cause a headache for security officials, both U.S. intelligence, but also our friendly intelligence partners in the Middle East as well, because this is just going to inflame an already very, of course, precarious situation.
Yeah, obviously, and it's caused fury, it's caused a lot of confusion around the Middle East, and the frustration on the Jordanian king's face yesterday was palpable. I'm just wondering, whether President Trump understands the quandary he's put, for example, King Abdullah in, because he's got a domestic audience that he's obviously got to think about, but should be at the forefront of his mind, and the consequences of having more Palestinians coming to live in Jordan, which is a small country. There are already a large number living there. I mean, this could have real ramifications at a domestic level, and some saying this is an existential issue for Jordan. I mean, did that come across, do you think, to President Trump yesterday?
Again, I can't imagine that any of his advisors, they should be, are telling him this. This is a really bad idea. I don't think he listens. And I do think it's an existential crisis for the Jordanians. And as I said earlier, I felt terrible watching King Abdullah, who had to really kind of, dance through what was a very unpleasant press conference. Look, I even saw that I looked at the face of Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, and he looked pained in this because no one really thinks this is a very good idea. And in particular, there is really cause for concern that it would destabilize our allies, such, of course, as Jordan. But Trump doesn't seem to listen. There are very capable people in the U.S. government who would be putting forth the notion that this is not something that we should pursue. But President Trump, if you look at his career, is not one to back down. I can't explain to you why he is continuing on this notion that this is any kind of good idea, even if he thinks it's some type of smart move in negotiations. Because again, the immediate effects on the stability of Jordan, the immediate effects on the rise of terrorist threats against the United States and our allies, that is palpable right now. And I think it's a gigantic own goal for the U.S.
And just lastly, Mark, supposing President Trump does decide to change his mind and say, OK, this was not such a good idea, and in fact, it's not workable because without allies in the Middle East helping and delivering on their side of what he sees as a deal. It's just not going to see the light of day. But supposing he did backtrack, I mean, would you say the damage is done and that some of the things we've been talking about, the dangers, the threats that this could in turn pose to US national security, has the damage been done?
Well, that's a great question. And I think there is significant damage already, again, because you have emboldened kind of the Islamic extremist community. They would say, see, this is what, the U.S. imperial ambitions are. And even if Trump backs down, we know what the U.S. ultimately wants to do. Of course, that's not correct. So I think there is some kind of long-standing damage. I think in terms of Jordan and Egypt, for example, look, both King Abdullah and then Sisi in Egypt could conceivably say, well, we came and we talked to President Trump and he backed down. So perhaps in the stability issues for Egypt and Jordan, there would not be long-standing damage. But in terms of the counterterrorism front, I do worry about that. And then really overall, just kind of the view of the United States as a reliable ally. I mean, this was kind of a hand grenade that was dropped into an already tense region. I guess that you could make you could certainly question is, will Trump do something like this again? So the U.S. as a reliable ally, I think a lot of our partners in the region will be questioning that.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Former Senior Intelligence Officer at the CIA, Mark Polymeropoulos. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, following on from that meeting at the White House between the US President Donald Trump and Jordan's King Abdullah, there was an exchange with reporters during which Al Arabiya's Washington correspondent, Nadia Bilbassi, asked him whether his plans for relocating Palestinians from Gaza to other countries would constitute ethnic cleansing. Here's a clip of their exchange.
Mr. President, how do you know that the Palestinians don't want to leave their land? Some people say this is ethnic cleansing. You won't be able to force them to leave their land.
We're moving them to a beautiful location where they have new homes, where they can live safely, where they'll have doctors and medical and all of those things. And I think it's going to be great.
President Trump speaking there. Well, our next guest is the former First Minister of Scotland and current member of the Scottish Parliament, representing Glasgow Pollock. Hamza Yousaf, thank you so much for joining us. People will remember your ordeal because your in-laws were, of course, trapped in Gaza for about a month at the start of the Israeli invasion. And during these last 16 months, you've become highly vocal on this situation. And you are, of course, the first Muslim leader of a Western democratic nation. So we really appreciate having you with us because I think we've got loads to talk about. And we're going to be talking about your family, their ordeal in Gaza in just a moment. But first, I just want to pick up on what we were just hearing there from President Trump, asked by our reporter last night about what's happening to the Palestinians in Gaza. She asked him if this constitutes ethnic cleansing. What are your thoughts?
Well, of course it does. It's the very textbook definition of ethnic cleansing. In fact, it's the dictionary definition of ethnic cleansing, to forcibly remove one group of people from their homes with the intent of replacing them with another is the very definition of ethnic cleansing. It's why, of course, Donald Trump chose not to answer your excellent reporter's question. And what we are seeing with the Trump presidency in particular is we are living, of course, in a time where we need the most serious of diplomacy, therefore the most serious of diplomats, the most serious of statesmen and women, the most serious of politicians, the most serious of heads of government and heads of state, and instead, inarguably the most powerful office in the entire world, we have a property tycoon. He's very good at real estate development, there's no doubt about it, but that's not the skill that we need. And I'm afraid he views everything, including the very complex situation in Israel and Palestine, and particularly at the moment within Gaza, as a real estate development opportunity. So call it whatever you like, talk about the Riviera of the Middle East as much as you like. I'm afraid it's ethnic cleansing, and everybody with a conscience, including every government with a conscience, should call it what it is.
OK, and what goes through your mind when you think that the ceasefire deal, which took months to negotiate, it only took effect on the 19th of January, could be on the brink of collapse?
I'm extremely worried. In fact, I'm devastated at the thought of the ceasefire breaking. It was always very fragile. We know that, of course. But why I'm so devastated and heartbroken at the thought of it is because it's not going to be militants, it's not going to be extremists, it's not going to be terrorists who suffer the consequences of, as Donald Trump put it, all hell breaking loose. It will be the innocent men, women and children of Gaza who had nothing to do with the attacks on October the 7th, 2023. They've never taken a single hostage in their lives. They're ordinary men, women and children who have suffered under occupation and oppression for many, many decades and are now possibly going to have to pay with their lives, as over 50,000 innocent Gazans have since October the 7th, 2023. So I'm extremely worried, and I hope that those who helped to broker the original ceasefire, predominantly Qatar and Egypt, along, of course, with the United States, I hope they can get Israel, Hamas back around that table to agree to the ceasefire, which of course should include the release of hostages. I've always condemned the taking of innocent people as hostages, but it should also, of course, make sure that Israel also abides by their part of the deal, including letting aid pour into Gaza, flood into Gaza, given the devastation that we're witnessing there.
And just turning now to some international reaction to all of these developments. The Scottish First Minister, John Swinney, who's a member of your party, has condemned President Trump's Gaza suggestions as, quote, completely unacceptable. Would you like to see him take that a little bit further, that condemnation?
He did. I mean, you've not read out the full quote. He called it ethnic cleansing, and I'm pleased he did, because there's so many leaders who refuse to call it what it is. They dance around the issue, they tiptoe around it, they beat around the bush, and they're too afraid to stand up and say what it is. And that wouldn't be the case, by the way, if it was Vladimir Putin who was saying that he expects to remove Ukrainians from Kiev, and he'll take them somewhere else, don't worry. Other Europeans can take them, maybe in Warsaw, maybe even in London, in Paris, and the capitals across Europe. But don't worry, I'll turn Kiev into a beautiful piece of real estate for people to enjoy. We would all quite rightly be not just condemning it, but calling it ethnic cleansing and demanding he get, if he carries out such a plan, gets held accountable for it. Why the difference, of course, when it is Gazans? Well, if the last 16 months have taught us anything, I'm afraid the stark reality is that Palestinian lives, Arab lives, I'm afraid are not equal to the lives of Europeans and those in the West. And that is entrenched, I'm afraid, in deep racism, systemic, institutionalized racism. And we should be standing up and calling it what it is.
And in terms of what the government down in London has been saying, the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer in particular, I mean, what do you think of the kind of language that they've been using to describe the situation? And really, as a follow-up to that question, do you get the impression perhaps they're a little bit scared of the Trump administration?
Well, it's complete cowardice, really. But it's worse than that from the United Kingdom government. Cowardice, is one thing. Complicity is a whole other. So we have a level of cowardice where Keir Starmer, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, they're unable and unwilling to call it what it is, i.e. ethnic cleansing. They're unwilling to take a robust and strong line because they're worried about what that would mean in terms of implication for the relationship, or the so-called special relationship, which only seems to be one way from where most of us observe. But the second thing is they are complicit. The United Kingdom government continues to supply arms to Israel, despite the fact, of course, the head of the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu, is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and has an arrest warrant out for him. So we don't just have cowardice, I'm afraid, from the United Kingdom government and many other governments, but focusing on the UK government, we have complicity.
Would you like to see the British government and Scottish senior figures following the example of, for example, Ireland, Norway and Spain, and officially recognising a Palestinian state? I mean, do you think that will ever happen?
The international recognition of the Palestinian state has to happen. And those countries that haven't done so, including, for example, the United Kingdom government, they are completely abdicating their responsibility to help with a meaningful peace process. So they're paying merely lip service to a two-state solution. You can't say that you agree with a two-state solution, but you only choose to recognize one state. You choose to recognize one side of the equation and leave blank the other side of the equation and wonder why you can't get a solution. And yes, the United Kingdom government should follow Ireland, Norway, Spain. The Scottish government doesn't have the powers to legally recognise a state. We've made it clear, of course, if we did have those powers, if we were an independent nation, or we were granted those powers through the current constitutional setup, then we would recognise a Palestinian state immediately, because it's the correct, the right and the moral thing to do.
You accused the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy of racism for meeting with an Israeli minister during the Gaza ceasefire negotiations. I just want to pick up on the word racist. Why that choice of word?
Well, I didn't specifically accuse David Lammy of that. What I said was the foreign policy which says that we will treat white Europeans, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Europeans in one way when it comes to foreign policy, but treat Arabs, Palestinians, whether they're Christian or Muslim, in another way, is got to be rooted in racism. Let's just be honest with each other here. If almost 50,000 innocent Ukrainians, including 70% of those being women and children, had been killed, then there would have been a ceasefire a long time ago, and we certainly wouldn't be supplying arms to the opposing side. But, of course, with Gazans, with Palestinians, with Arabs, the situation is very different. Different rules apply. And that can only be rooted, I'm afraid, in racism. That's what it is. So, look, I'm never afraid to call these things out for what they are. And the sooner we do that, perhaps we can have a more honest conversation. David Lammy is somebody who's fought against racism, I know, his entire life, and very passionate about it, has been the subject of racism his entire life. This is not about the individual. This is about the institutions. And until we confront institutional racism within our governments, including the Scottish government, the United Kingdom government, governments across the world, then I'm afraid it's going to continue to happen.
Let's turn our attention across the Atlantic, because you've had this public feud with Elon Musk. And by the way, he's called you a, quote, super racist. I don't know what you think of that, but you've called him one of the most dangerous men on the planet. And now that we've had about 3 weeks to see him in action within the second Trump administration, I'm wondering if you stand by that assessment.
Well, everything I said about Elon Musk in summer last year has been proven to be true. I called him the most dangerous man on the planet, given he was using his billions to buy unfettered access to arguably the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States. He has now done that. And he's not done it for good purposes, but nefarious purposes. And not only that, of course, in the intervening period, we've had Elon Musk align himself with far-right white supremacists, like Tommy Robinson, who calls Islam a violent and fascist ideology. He's supported people like Geert Wilders from the Netherlands, who has called the Quran, compared it to Mein Kampf. He's called for mosques to be banned. He aligns himself with the AfD in Germany, the AfD who dedicated an entire chapter of their manifesto titled "Islam does not belong to Germany." So it was the legendary author Maya Angelou who said, when people show you who they are, you should believe them the first time. And Elon Musk, Nazi salute and all, has shown us time and time again who he is. It's about time we believed him.
So are you saying that Elon Musk is Islamophobic?
I'm saying that Elon Musk, not only is he Islamophobic, I think he is somebody who clearly has white supremacist, far-right sympathies. It's hard to make any other conclusion. Look, I was about to say to you, putting the Nazi salute to the side, look at all the other evidence, but what a way to start a sentence. What a way to start a sentence about somebody. Put the Nazi salute to the side. So that's the kind of person we're dealing with. And he shows no signs at all of pulling back. I think he is going to continue to use his enormous wealth, almost unlimited wealth to not only influence elections, but remember here in the United Kingdom, he's looking to overthrow a democratically elected Prime Minister. I might not agree with Keir Starmer on too many issues, including, of course, his stance on Israel, Gaza, but I have to respect the fact that he has a significant mandate to be Prime Minister, and nobody, certainly not somebody from another country, should be using their billions to try to overthrow him.
Yeah, and just picking up on that influence that he's got on the United Kingdom, I mean, do you see him succeeding in his goal? I mean, is he making traction, would you say, in terms of achieving that objective?
Of course he's making traction because he's extremely powerful and, of course, completely unaccountable. So he owns a platform, X, of course, which has, 650 million users, double the size of the United States population. So he has a huge platform which he owns, and he spreads disinformation, and of course admitted to that. He was in the Oval Office just yesterday, his office really, as opposed to Donald Trump's. Donald Trump was sitting there quietly like a good boy listening to the puppet master. And there was Elon Musk saying, he was questioned about his incorrect and inaccurate statement around $50 million going to Gaza in the Middle East. And of course, it turned out $50 million was not going to Gaza in the Middle East. It was going to a place called Gaza in, I think, Mozambique. And he said, look, at times I do make inaccurate and incorrect statements, and then I go to correct them. Well, you didn't correct that statement is the entire point. What Elon Musk does is he is the cheerleader in chief when it comes to spreading disinformation. And by the time, if he corrects that information, which he really does, but if he does, then I'm afraid the consequences have already been felt, usually by minority communities. And that was the same here in Southport in the United Kingdom, where he amplified and spread disinformation. And we ended up in the summer seeing mosques having bricks thrown through the windows, people of colour and Muslims targeted in the street, and a hotel full of vulnerable asylum seekers almost set on fire.
So just before we move on from talking about the world's richest man, I mean, what are your sort of thoughts to sort of summarise this chapter of our discussion? Do you have a warning? Could you explain to us the degree to which you're concerned about where things might head to from here?
In my view, the rise of the far right, which is driven by predominantly anti-Muslim hatred, whether it's the National Front in France, the Freedom Party in the Netherlands, AFD in Germany, whether it's parties like Reform here in the United Kingdom, driven by anti-Muslim hatred, anti-migrant hatred. If we continue to allow this rising tide of the far right to continue, if we don't challenge it and don't confront it, if we don't confront those who support it, influence it, amplify it, like Elon Musk, then I think Western democracy is under threat of complete collapse. Because how on earth can we have true democracy when oligarchs like Elon Musk can buy elections? How can we have a democracy when the world's richest man, through his money, wealth, platforms, influence, can overthrow or attempt to overthrow democratically elected heads of government? So I think the rise of the far right, amplified by Elon Musk, is, if not the biggest threat, one of the biggest threats to Western democracy.
Now, talking more specifically about you and your own story, you're the son of people of Pakistani heritage from the Punjab. You've suggested, and I think you've been saying this as we've been going along in this conversation, that Islamophobia is a growing problem in not just Scotland, the United Kingdom as a whole. You've also been quoted as saying that that sentiment, that sort of undercurrent, could drive you and your daughters away from the United Kingdom. I just want to pick up on that. I mean, is that correct? And are you thinking of leaving?
Look, I don't want to leave Scotland. I'm talking to you from Scotland. It's my home. It's where I'm raising, my wife and I are raising our three beautiful daughters. It's the country I was born in, educated in, and of course it's the country I had the great privilege of serving in various ministerial portfolios, as well as, of course, leading as the First Minister of the country. So you can cut me in half and I'll bleed blue of Scotland. So that Scotland is my heart. It's in my heart. It's my home. So I would never want to leave Scotland. But if I go back to those Southport riots, I never thought I'd live in an era or a time where we would have bricks thrown through the windows of mosques, violence that targets Muslims, specifically looking for Muslims to target. And therefore, my first responsibility, not as a former First Minister or as a Member of Parliament, as you gave me in my introduction, my first and foremost responsibility is as a father. And could I honestly say, given the rising tide of the far right across Europe, including here in the United Kingdom, driven by anti-Muslim hatred, that my daughters, who proudly will be proudly Muslim, my 15-year-old wears her identity proudly, and so she should. Can I say that she would be safe and they would be safe in this country? I think the answer to that is, well, at the very best, I'm not sure. And therefore, if I have to take steps to protect my children, of course I would do that. So look, I don't have any plans to leave. I wouldn't want to leave. But of course, I'm deeply worried about the safety of my children. I hope every other parent that's watching this or listening to this could understand that fear.
One of the other things you're quoted as having said is that 9/11 changed your life. And if I've done my mathematics right, you were 16 at the time of 9/11. You were at secondary school in Glasgow. I'm just wondering what it changed for you.
I mean, so much. I was your kind of typical Glaswegian 16-year-old. I was in love with my football team, still am. Glasgow Celtic, who are playing, I should say, tonight on playing on Wednesday. That was pretty much all I thought about. I thought if I wasn't playing football, I was talking about football. If I wasn't talking about football, I was watching football. So I was your typical Glasgow, west of Scotland teenage boy. Of course, I'd encountered racism before 9/11, and then, quite literally overnight, things changed. I remember going into my morning form class or registration class the day after 9/11. So 9/11 was on a Tuesday, going on the Wednesday morning and sitting next to my friends, who were the same two boys I sat beside, all year. And they, instead of talking about football, all the other things that teenage boys talk about, they started bombarding me with questions around 9/11. Do you know who did it? Who is it that flew those planes into the Twin Towers? Why is it Muslims hate America? And they weren't in any way, by the way, being malicious. They genuinely thought, as a Muslim, I must know the answer. So from that day, or that night onwards, I watched the news for the first time. I never used to watch the news until the sports results came on. That night, I chose to watch the news from start to finish with my dad, and I became hooked. But it was also the day that we went from people being targeted for the colour of their skin, which of course still happens, but for most Muslims it went from the targeting of the colour of the skin to suddenly being abused because of your faith. And I'd never been called a terrorist or a jihadist or an extremist or a fundamentalist or had my loyalty questioned until 9/11 happened. And, since then, of course, many other things, geopolitical events have taken place, and all of them, of course, many of them, I should say, have been exploited in order to further anti-Muslim hatred by generalising that Muslims must sympathise or in some way even be involved in such atrocities when, of course, the vast overwhelming majority of Muslims, the 2 billion or so that are across the world, live peaceful lives and want peace for themselves and the communities that they live in.
And of course, geopolitics and events, a long way from Scotland have had a very direct impact on your life in recent months and years. And we were talking at the beginning about how your parents-in-law were trapped in Gaza for 4 weeks at the start of the Israeli invasion. Just want to ask you, how is your family doing?
I'm grateful that you asked. I mean, my mother-in-law and father-in-law, I think, are going to live with the trauma of those 4 weeks for the rest of their lives. I don't think they'll ever be the same people again. Most of my wife, Nadia's family, have managed to leave Gaza, but she still has some family. She was recently talking to her cousin who has 4 young children. She has a husband and 4 young children. She's originally from the north of Gaza, Nadia's cousin, but has not returned to the north because she's been told there's no point. No point in making the long, arduous journey because the house she had has been completely decimated and turned into rubble. The condition of the children and of Nadia's cousin, I mean, they are emaciated, they are malnourished, they're desperate for food, desperate for water, medicine. It's just the basics, not anything extravagant, just the basics. And it's a miserable situation. I mean, we've run out of words. I mean, your news channel will be running the scenes for the last 16 months. It is, as Donald Trump called it himself, it's hell on earth. The difference is, of course, Donald Trump was sitting next to the man who's made it hell on earth. And the rest of us now have a responsibility in terms of the international community to get that ceasefire back on track so we can continue to flood Gaza with as much aid as possible to help the innocent people who had nothing to do with the atrocious attacks that we saw on the 7th of October 2023.
Yeah, and of course, what do you think your relatives, the ones who've been so directly impacted by what's happened in Gaza, make of these plans for a so-called Riviera or whatever President Trump said it was going to be? How do they digest comments like that?
Well, I think we can almost universally agree that the people of Gaza are the most resilient and strongest that I've ever witnessed in my whole life. They have gone through the most horrendous atrocities, losing their children, entire families being wiped out, all of their infrastructure damaged or destroyed, schools, hospitals, water infrastructure. Yet you saw them in there, if not hundreds of thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, making their way back up to not even their homes, sometimes the rubble that's left of their homes in North Gaza. They're incredibly resilient people, but they are, for all the travesty that they've been through, the atrocities that they've been through, every Gazan to a man and woman will say, we don't want to leave our land. My Nadia's family were the same. They simply didn't want to leave. Some of them, of course, have left, and who could begrudge them the opportunity to do so, particularly those with young children. But many of them are saying, we simply just will not leave. And, I think about it, I try to put myself in their shoes. If somebody came to me and said, we're going to take your land off you, your home. As I said, I'm as Scottish as they can be. We're going to take your home in Scotland. And don't worry, you'll get a beautiful piece of land in Mauritius, those wonderful white sandy beaches. But look, we're just going to, you're not really got a choice. We're just going to take your land and we're going to give it to somebody else. Or we're just going to take it. I would tell them where to go. And, it is absolutely right that Gaza continues to belong to the people of Gaza. And I think the Arab nations have a big responsibility to make it abundantly clear, loud and clear, that they simply will not stand for the ethnic cleansing of the people of Palestine.
Okay, just lastly, you were the first minister of colour, the first Muslim leader of a Western democratic nation. You've stepped back, obviously, from being first minister. It's been reported you're going to stand down as an MSP. But you're not even 40 years old. Just lastly, this cannot be the end of your career. What are you going to do now?
I'm hurtling towards 40, I should say. I've got a couple of months in my 30s left. But look, I would certainly take a step back from party politics. But what I'd be keen to do is continue to use the expertise and skills that I've gained, what to do, what not to do, to try to help with some of the most pressing challenges our world faces. And that includes conflict. We have far too much conflict in the world, and we've talked about just Gaza, and think about all the other conflict that exists across the world. If I can use those skills in conflict resolution, but also in tackling the rising threat of the far right, those are the kind of areas that I'm interested in. But look, I've still got over a year to make sure I continue to represent the wonderful constituents in Glasgow Pollock who deserve my attention and certainly have my attention, and I take their trust as a very serious one. So look, nothing lined up as of yet, and I'm sure those conversations will take place over the course of the next year and a bit.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for your time. We really appreciate it. Former First Minister of Scotland, Hamza Yousaf. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure talking to you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Your Excellency, I want to kick off by just asking you to walk us through how you see the role of public service, because it's not only a family legacy, but it's also a passion.
Just for some context, for those who might not know, my grandfather was Shaheed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He was the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Pakistan. He gave us our constitution. He was a voice for the disenfranchised, and he gave his life for his country. He was sent to the gallows by a cruel and conniving dictator who sentenced him for a crime he did not commit. Only for 50 years later, for the same Supreme Court that was stained with his blood to come out and say he was innocent. Only proving my grandfather's last words, which were, "Oh God, help me, for I am innocent." My mother, Shaheed Mohtharma Benazir Bhutto, was the first and youngest female Prime Minister of Pakistan and in the Muslim world. And it was her pursuit for justice for her father which propelled her into politics. And hers was a turbulent journey. She faced police brutality, incarceration, character assassinations, too often used on women, exile. She was basically a mother raising her children, as well as fighting for my father's release from jail, and all the while running and leading the largest political party in Pakistan. So as you can see, it's not an easy legacy to live up to, but it's one that I can't walk away from. For my family, sacrifice, service, fighting for the greater good is all we know. My grandfather used to say that the paradise of God lies under the feet of your mother, but the paradise of politics lies under the feet of the people. And for my family, these are not mere words. This is our ethos.
How do you view the situation for women in Pakistan today?
What I've seen with my mother, and something that I still see today, is that women have to work twice as hard to get half as much acknowledgement as a man. But we are a strong and resilient force. The founder of our nation, Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, used to say that there are two great powers in this world. One is the sword, and the other is the pen. And there's a great deal of rivalry and competition between the two. But there's a third power, greater than both, and that is our women. So the more time I spend on the ground, I see what a strong force we are. And with regards to the issues that women might be facing, whether it's in Pakistan or globally, you name them, we're facing them. Be it inequality, be it security, be it access to healthcare, education. But we are a strong and resilient force, and the more time I spend on the ground, I see that with the power of the vote, we manage to make our voices heard. And for those who haven't voted or for some reason are outside the voting apparatus, they too, when they join forces and rally together, their voice can make cities come to a standstill.
Yeah. You wear two hats. You're a member of parliament as well as being First Lady. How do you square the two? Because you need to be outspoken for your constituents, and at the same time, sometimes it's difficult to be political.
That's true. I've only recently become First Lady as my father became president, and as a widow, he decided to name his youngest daughter First Lady in order to fill that role and make sure that We have a strong representative for women and women's rights.
Do you feel like you have to hold back?
I have to hold back slightly when I'm in the arena of being the First Lady. But as a member of the National Assembly, when I'm on the National Assembly floor, I will be fighting for my people's rights, needs, and whatever they say to do. I'm their public servant.
Yeah. In discussing your family's legacy, it's impossible not to focus on the fact that politics, as you know, can be deadly. Right now, Imran Khan says he's under threat for his life. How credible, in your mind, are those threats?
I think that anyone who says that their life is in danger is a threat that we need to take seriously. But it is heartening to see. It is heartening to see that all the avenues are open to him. For example, all the courts are there for him to fight his cases. All his needs in jail, whether it be for his newspapers or gym equipment, are being met. And I would not wish anyone in Pakistan to face great difficulty, and I hope he will go through the avenues of the court, and the courts will have their verdict.
Are you confident he will have a fair treatment by the judicial system?
I think so. I do believe that he'll be able to put his case forward, and based on what the evidence says, they'll be able to make their decision.
Talk me through this. You have been a passionate proponent of the need for vaccines, particularly with regards to polio. When you see those in the United States, for example, President-elect Trump's pick, RFK Jr., who's a vaccine skeptic, does that worry you?
Right now, I'm more worried about the issues that Pakistan is facing. I'm sure that the United States has a rigorous campaign before you go to school, you have to get vaccinated. Before any large forums, there need to be vaccinations for your child to make sure that at every stage they get their vaccinations. But with regards to Pakistan, I'm an advocate for polio eradication in Pakistan. I've been their ambassador also for the United Nations and Rotary International. And the challenges we face are greatly different.
Yeah.
And some of in 1994, my mother actually gave me the first oral polio vaccine. And this was when she was Prime Minister at the time, and she often said that as a woman leader, she brought an additional role to her office. She brought that of a mother.
Yeah.
So she spearheaded this campaign across the country. Then I would have to say that the changes in government leads to an issue for us on the ground. We had a period of dictatorship under which the reality of the situation was simply not being reported. We went through another change in government under which all the stakeholders, be it the President, the Prime Minister, the Army Chief of Staff, all believed that this was an important issue and they were determined to eradicate this disease. Then we went through another change of government under which the government at the time did not take this seriously. And when the heads of government don't take this issue seriously of vaccination, there's a trickle-down effect. It trickles down to the bureaucrats, it trickles down to the health ministers, the health systems, all the way down to the health workers on the ground.
Yeah.
That this is not a serious issue. So I would have to say that that is one of the challenges that we're facing. A second challenge is that there was a misuse of our vaccination drive for security reasons, which brought about a lot of mistrust amongst our nation. We had clerics preaching that this vaccine would cause infertility and spreading misinformation. And this is an ongoing process. We have to take them on board as stakeholders and explain to them that this is the same vaccine that the United Arab Emirates uses, this is the same vaccine that Saudi Arabia uses, and they've managed to successfully eradicate this disease. So this is an ongoing process. But as a consequence of these two issues, we've had a lot of targeted attacks on our polio workers. There's been senseless killings of our polio workers on the ground. And our security forces also who are protecting them. And their only crime was that they were trying to fight for our future generation. Their crime was that they wanted to ensure that every single child was vaccinated. So these are some of the issues. And lastly, I would have to say our geography. We're on the border with Afghanistan, and we see a great deal of migration that occurs. And in that process, some children miss our national immunization drives. We've made progresses in this. We've put vaccinators at the border. We've put vaccinators in between cities and in between provinces. So we're determined to try and reach every single child out there. I would have to say that these are some of the challenges we're facing. But if I talk to you about the progress that we're making, I would have to say that, and the successes, I would have to say that every single child vaccinated is a success. Every single child we managed to save from this crippling disease is a success.
Yeah.
And until we reach the ultimate goal of a polio-free Pakistan, these are the successes that I need to hold on to and build on.
You mentioned geography. Obviously, you're in a position at this point where geography has a great deal of impact on not just foreign policy, but obviously on the situation for women. How devastating, in your mind, was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, your neighbor? Because at this point, it seems as if the international community doesn't or isn't able to help those women. We gave them great promise, and then we abandoned them.
With regards of the way the exit from Afghanistan was conducted, I think that record speaks for itself. It's devastating to see, but we have to have faith in the Afghan government and their systems to try, and we have to ensure that as a country like Pakistan, who it's our neighbor, we can try and encourage them to, take on board our women and perhaps not go with such stern language when it comes to them. But it's also that they are their own country, and we can't dictate them to tell them what they should do.
Yeah. Do you happen to think that there's something that the international community could do to help women there that they're not doing? Is there a pressure that we could exert?
I think that it's a very difficult situation because in the manner in which they stayed and they exited, it causes great difficulty for anyone in the world to dictate to them what they should or should not be doing.
Yeah.
So I think engagement with the Afghan government is the best option we have.
Yeah. Tell me this, when you think back to the legacy of your mother, not just as Prime Minister, but also as a parent, what are some of the lessons?
As I get older, even 16 years on from her assassination, I realize that there was a lesson in everything she said and did. Yeah. And despite the greatest odds, she managed to endure with incredible elegance, dignity, and grace. And if you've ever seen Sucker Jail and the conditions she was in, you would see how difficult that was. So in the face of adversity, I can only hope and pray to have half as much elegance, dignity, and grace as she did.
"16 years on, what is your advice to the women in this room as they look to take their place, not just as women, as mothers potentially, but also as those who are leading corporations, excited about being entrepreneurs and startups, and also going into politics?"
My message to young women would be to believe in yourself, remain steadfast in your values, never underestimate the power of your voice. Leadership is not about privilege and position. It's shaped by purpose and persistence. And we must remember that the road ahead will be challenging, but we must embrace education, foster empathy, commit ourselves to uplifting all those around us. True leadership lies in service to others and the pursuit for justice, opportunity, and equality for all. My message to the younger generation would be that you are the architects of a brighter future.
Walk me through this one. As women, we often discuss how we are not just subject to the regular standards. We are also subject to even higher standards in what we wear and what we say and how we do our hair. Do you believe that that's evolving?
I would hope and pray that this evolves. However, I will give you an example. Well, it's heartening to see the number of women leaders across the world today.
Yeah.
I still think that we need to face issues that our male colleagues don't necessarily need to face. I can give you an example. I was in an interview with a prominent international news organization, and at the time we were talking about the crackdown on our party, the fear I had for my father's life in jail. This was his 2019 persecution against him, not to be confused with the 90s persecution against him. And at the end of the interview, I still get asked, "But do you like to cook?" So as women,
what do you like to cook?
But as women, we have to still prove today that yes, we can cook, we can clean, and we can lead. And we must simply have to endure and keep going.
Yeah, I mean, the unfair criticism I think that we've seen for women politicians across the board in the West as well. I mean, Hillary Clinton, not attacking her words per se, or challenging her words, but challenging her choice of outfit. Yeah.
I try to model my outfits on the basis of my mother.
Yes.
And it brings me a lot of comfort to have her white dupatta style around me. It makes me feel that I have her with me at all times.
And embrace. And just to close out our session, in your mind, where are we today in this region? Because the extraordinary strides made right here in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, for example, are inspiring, but the region still has more to do.
I think, number one, we must acknowledge the United Arab Emirates. Just look at this platform today. Many of our neighbors don't have this platform, and this is truly a global event. People from all across the world, all across nations, everyone has an inspiring story, a history. So I think that we need more platforms like this, and hopefully the region around us will also evolve into understanding the importance of women, giving them an opportunity, giving them a glimpse into public service and seeing how well they shine.
Yeah, and speaking of that glimpse into public service, what would be your suggestion to those in the audience today who are looking potentially to go into public service?
I believe that the world is your oyster and there is an opportunity everywhere.
Yeah.
And especially in the United Arab Emirates, just look at the number of cabinet members. Look at the people in His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid's office. The number of women has grown every single year. And I think that other countries around the world need to model this.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Hadley.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Rizkan Show for empowering conversation.